Salutations, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Podcast of the Storm, social awkward outcast, crazy riddles, and all around nerds convening talk and debate all things pop culture. With me, as always, is my co-host and radio cultist, aka Dalton Skinner, Dalton L. Mortimer.
Hello, everyone, and I just thought of an idea about that new character we were discussing that I will have to talk to you about after the stream. Damn it.
And I am your host last time and want to be the brainstorm of pop culture. How's everyone doing tonight?
Good. For those that don't know, Brainstorm and I have a terrible habit of coming up with the most interesting topic of conversation right as we're about to go live. And it really got under my skin today.
I completely blame myself because it was me who broached the subject first.
At like 7:50. It was inevitable, but still I did just come up with an interesting idea that we'll talk about after stream.
Okay. So yeah, this is somewhat a catch up still, just because really there was nothing.
Hmm.
Oh, no, let me rephrase that. There was only one thing of note that caught my eye this week in terms of news, and we will get to that. Hopefully, we'll get to that.
So
Uh,
we dove back into the pile of filler stories that we have been saving for just such an occasion as this.
yeah, yeah. First one. This is one we covered when we first covered the Marvel trailer. Um, it's from RollingStone.com. Brie Larson's The Marvel already has MCU fanboys in their feelings. Published April 13th, 2023. Written by C.T. Jones. Oh, and let me go.
Okay, sorry, I was falling out of the chair I was sitting in, so that did not go well.
Is it one of those IKEA chairs?
No, I was just sitting kind of on the edge of it, and now it's and now I am more appropriately situated.
Okay.
Anyway, um, again, did it ever occur to anyone, writer of this article, that people might be hating on it because it's an IP that not many people care about, not because the character is unimportant, but because the execution of how the character was portrayed was bad, and it's a sequel to a movie a lot of people had hatred for, again, not because misogyny, but because of quality and the ideological gobbledygook that was there in place of a good story or an interesting character. But no, we can't ever address the issues of quality or IP salience or character consistency slash likability. We have to always be misogyny because reasons.
Um, shit, I had something. Right. I do want to mention that we are kind of going to start over with this article because I do not remember what podcast it was that we had covered this first.
Yeah, I don't remember even covering it, to be honest. I thought we kept moving it back and back and back and never got to it.
We might have. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, we are starting over just in case. So,
Hmm.
um, and the subheader for this, and you brought up misogyny. Just say you hate women and leave. Honestly,
Um, except that wouldn't be true, though. Feminism isn't women. Feminism isn't even femininity. And feminism, sure as shit, is not equality. There are such a thing as non-feminist female characters that are strong, empowered, and empowering to actual women. Also, the criticisms have nothing to do with hating on a woman or a female character. It has to do with hating on the way that this specific female character or these specific female characters have been handled. People are mad at Carol Danvers because she is a whiny, bitchy Mary Sue, and is a mouthpiece for the ideological framework known as intersectional feminism. People are mad at Monica Rambeau largely for in-universe reasons, and actually she is the one that people like the most of all three of the main Marvels. But people are mad at her insofar as they are mad at her for the stupid way WandaVision ended. Where instead of chasing after Wanda, like Wanda was the Hulk and she was Thunderbolt Ross, Monica basically did all she could to excuse literal brainwashing of an entire town accidentally for several weeks. And I will stress the accidentally point there, because for most of the incident in Westview, Wanda did not know what she was doing, and that's fair enough. And as soon as she knew what she was doing, she only put a stop to undoing it just long enough for her to say goodbye to the constructs of her husband and children, which I would say is fair. But even so, she used reality bending chaos magic to brainwash an entire town and warp reality in a several mile radius. And rather than being treated by the walking WMD that she is, because she can warp reality on a whim, she was treated like a random pickpocket and just let off the hook with a warning. Meanwhile, as we all know, the Hulk simply exists, and Thunderbolt Ross goes, "I'm about to wreck this man's whole career." Which, it's actually less understandable with the Hulk than it is with Wanda, because her grief was strong enough to break reality and brainwash dozens of people, if not hundreds. Anyway, moving the fuck. Oh wait, I didn't address the whole Miss Marvel thing. And people don't like Miss Marvel because she is a hipster's impression of a geek girl, and a lot of the Muslim shit in her series was largely forced, and they altered her powers and backstory several times over. Not only did they change her from being an Inhuman to being a Jinn, which in and of itself probably would have been fine, they implied that she was a mutant, and she was at least implied to be a mutant before the X-Men even got to show up. Also keep in mind that she was the first example we had in the MCU of a Jinn. So if the argument is she is a mutant Jinn, way to show us a mutant version of something before you show us the non-mutant version of it, which is just stupid. But yeah, there are plenty of reasons why people don't like the three main characters in the Marvels. None of them have to do with misogyny. None. Niet, no point. Moving on.
Um, Surprise, surprise, less than 3 days after Marvel Studios released the first teaser trailer for the upcoming film Marvel, the film and its star Brie Larson are already facing backlash from the misogynistic side of Marvel fandom.
Say that again. You got to backlash and then it got garbled.
Sorry. Okay. Facing backlash from the misogynistic side of Marvel fandom.
There is no such thing. Misogyny is vanishingly rare and basically is a glorified mental condition. No one on a large or societal scale actually for real hates women. There are some people who hate some individual women, but they don't hate the soul of all womankind or some shit. And also, small print, there is no such hive mind, which is the other canard of this. It's very hard, actually, to foment demographic hatred, i.e., someone who hates an entire demographic of people. Because most people treat people like indie fucking visuals. And if anything, the one kind of demographic hatred that is seen as socially acceptable in this day and age is the hatred of men. But almost no one anywhere actually hates women. They have done studies on this, and one of the interesting things about those studies is, on average, men have an outgroup preference, i.e., men on average would rather spend time with women than with other men. However, when they did this same study on women, they found that women in general have an in-group preference, which is actually unique because you would consider, by virtue of common sense, that either both parties would have an out-group preference because of mate selection and coupling, or that both sets of people would have an in-group preference because of some kind of camaraderie. But what we actually found in that study was men in general have an out-group preference, i.e., men would rather spend time with women than other men, but women would rather spend time with other women than men, which means that both genders, or both of the main two varieties of sex, have a preference to spending time with women, which results in virtually no one giving a shit about men. But that's a conversation unto itself. My main point is that demographic hatred is hard to foment, period, because most people are more individualistic than that. It takes a lot for someone to look at someone's demographic qualities over their individual humanity. I.e., it's very hard to get someone to look at a black person and think the N word before they think that is an individual human being. And it's true of all the other categories as well. Anyway, moving on.
Right. In theaters, November 10th, the Marvel sees its Pittsburgh characters Captain Marvel, Larson, Miss Marvel, Iman Vellani. Again, if I say his name wrong, I'm super sorry.
He's bad at the most English of English names. Don't begrudge him any of the foreign ones.
And Saber, Captain Monica Rambeau, Tenora Paris. Struggling to figure out what mystery force has them switching bodies and powers uncontrollably. They're not switching bodies or powers, they're switching places whenever they use their powers.
Yeah, as far as we can tell from the trailer, they're teleporting between each other. They're not switching powers. Unless that is how it actually works and you're going off of some press release, but that wasn't what was depicted in the trailer. Most of what was depicted in the trailer was not body swapping, not power swapping, but teleportation, location swapping, basically. Anyway, moving right along.
Okay. While not a direct sequel, The Marvels is the first Marvel film to feature Larson's Carol Danvers as the main character since 2019's Captain Marvel. The film will also overlap with storylines from the Disney Plus series Miss Marvel and WandaVision, which introduced viewers to Bucky, Kamala Khan, and Rambeau.
And here's the other problem with this whole thing. Because both of, or rather I should say, 2 out of the 3 characters come from TV shows which are varying degrees of not well liked, you wind up with the audience that would be informed on their backstories being minimalized. And even the ones that are aware of their backstories might not actually enjoy the backstories universally. Like a lot of people had problems with the chicanery with Kamala's powers and then making her a mutant. A lot of people had problems with, as I said, in a sane world, Monica Rambeau should have treated uh, Scarlet Witch like Thunderbolt Ross treats the Hulk, but she didn't. She did everything to excuse her, and she didn't do it for what seems like organic in-universe reasons. She did it because she was basically functioning as the writer's mouthpiece in that moment. And ironically, that means that of the three of them, Monica is probably the most well-liked of the three based on her characterization, but she also has the most overt reasons for not liking her because of the mistake she made in Westview. And if the movie doesn't frame her actions in Westview as a mistake, that will also negatively affect the audience retention. Moving on.
Okay. But on YouTube, the official upload from Marvel Studios has been hit by over 300,000 dislikes and thousands of copy pasta comments. Popular way to spam content and drown out positive replies by indicating comment sections with similar messaging. In comparison, Morbius, a superhero film decided by both critics and audiences, derided by both critics and audiences, has only been disliked on YouTube 11,000 times since its trailer was posted a year ago.
Okay, and again, I must once again explain to you the difference between passive apathetic dislike and active dislike. Because here's the thing. While Morbius was bad because it was largely the most incompetent thing we've seen in this genre for several decades, there was no active spite for the fan base in it, apart from possibly not having Spider-Man in. But because Brie Larson made it a point to actively spite the fan base, it at every turn and in every interview on the lead up to Captain Marvel, there is a lot of active reasons why people don't like Brie Larson's Captain Marvel. And I want to stress it being Brie Larson's Captain Marvel because a lot of people have fond memories or fond opinions of Carol Danvers as a character. She's just not being actively represented well in this franchise because rather than present the character or any of the likable traits she originally had, they turn the character into a feminist mouthpiece and or Brie Larson's own self-insert because the two kind of overlap. Because from all we've seen of Brie Larson, she appears to be a dyed-in-the-wool intersectional feminist in an absurd and confrontational and actively spiteful way. As for the other two, again, the issue of neither WandaVision nor Miss Marvel went away unscathed in terms of criticism, and the audience that was consistent enough to actually watch the thing as it came out were also fairly small. So even if every person who watched WandaVision or Miss Marvel showed up and liked the movie, that would still be a very small percentage. Captain Marvel, on the other hand, which is the most overtly successful of the three franchises, or three IPs rather, while it was successful, it was largely successful, as we all know, because it came out between Infinity War and Endgame and claimed to be a crucial part of what of how Endgame would be resolved in the marketing. However, a lot of people still, even though they saw Captain Marvel the movie, came away liking neither Brie Larson as an actress or as a person, nor Captain Marvel as she was portrayed in the movie. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Captain Feminist and the Patriarchy Stone. One comment under the Marvels read, what piece of crap.
Yes,
Marvel
that is very much the joke, because rather than actually be a three-dimensional female character like Ellen Ripley, Dana Barrett, Buffy Summers, the Powerpuff Girls,
Impossible.
Kim Possible, um,
Kara. Koff.
well, yes, but I'm trying to I'm trying to think of other like inarguably famous examples of strong female characters, quote unquote.
Charlie's Angels.
Um, hmm?
Charlie's Angels, like the original.
Yeah, the original Charlie's Angels. I'm trying to think. Kaylin M now from either The Sword of Truth or Legend of the Seeker, just because I can't get that out of my head because I reread that book recently. Karen Murphy, Molly Carpenter, basically just all the female characters in Dresden Files. Let's just be let's just blanket add to list on that, because I couldn't sit here and list them all. We would be here all day. But rather than actually be a three-dimensional character who is female and happens to be strong, she is an ideological feminist character who spouts nothing but gender studies talking points. And when Brie Larson was marketing the character, she also was a overly confrontational bitch who spouted nothing but gender studies talking points, especially in her famous Wrinkle in Time discussion, wherein she basically told everyone who the movie wasn't quote unquote made for to GTFO, and then when they did, she shamed them for it. That's the other logical issue here. The other fundamental logical lapse here. When you actively spite your fan base, you do not then get to be offended when the fan base acts as though they have been spited and spite you in turn. When you tell someone in no uncertain terms and in quite a lot of swearing to get the fuck out, don't be surprised when they walk away in a huff and don't come back. If you say we don't need the original toxic fans, some of the original toxic fans, quote unquote, and I'm using that term with, a certain level of irony, will walk away and not come again. In fact, the vast majority of people, when told we don't want you, get the fuck out, won't even be all that angry. They will just leave and not come back. But a small percentage of that percentage of people will go away and don't come back again, but they will also be quite angry at you for insisting they get the fuck out in no uncertain terms. And it is this rage that directs them to criticize the movie and possibly also meme it. Because when they are emotionally and intellectually invested in an IP, and that IP's owners / managers tell them in no uncertain terms that their kind simply ain't welcome around here no more, they are going to act as though they have been personally slighted, because when you take something that is very personal and very crucial to a person's identity, and you rip it away from them in no uncertain terms and tell them to get the fuck out, some people might take that the tiniest bit personally. And if you try to use identity or social justice as a human shield, don't be surprised if some of those criticisms happen to be, by the way, social justice is bullshit, and no amount of moral chicanery will allow you to use this person as a human shield. Which is what you are seeing and falsely interpreting as misogyny. You insisted that spiting the fan base was okay because we had the moral high ground, and so people who felt slighted and spited attacked your moral high ground. It just so happened that because that moral high ground was based erroneously on what you think an entire demographic thinks, you can't tell the difference between attacking your moral high ground on an issue and attacking the people you weaponized to get that moral high ground in the alleged first place. Moving on.
Right. Marvel/Disney has gone off the deep end once again. So another, it seems Disney is willing to decimate and destroy anything you remember about Marvel Comics just to push their narrative.
Okay, and again, that criticism was mainly a criticism about the movie's lack of consistency or quality in relation to the original source material. That is what you get when someone prioritizes the quality or integrity of the original source material over socio-political gobbledygook. And yet you are listing him as though that counts as some kind of misogyny. Derp. You're not seeing hatred for women, you're seeing love of the original IP. And you are conflating these two things erroneously because you tried to use a certain demographic of people as a human shield to give yourself the moral high ground, and people perceived that and began to attack your moral high ground. And because you can't tell the difference between what you think about people and the people themselves, you insinuate that attacking your moral high ground is tantamount to attacking the people you're weaponizing to get it, which is incredibly disingenuous, ignorant, and wrong. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. This isn't Morrison's first time dealing with man-children for checks, notes, doing her contractually obligated job. Even before Captain Marvel premiered, movie review site Rotten Tomatoes had to update its entire policy in an attempt to prevent angry male fans from review bombing the film before anyone saw it.
Okay, you might have to read that whole thing again. I didn't get a word of that.
This isn't Brie Larson's first time dealing with man-children for doing her contractually obligated job. Even before Captain Marvel premiered, movie review site Rotten Tomatoes had to update its entire policy in an attempt to prevent angry male fans from review bombing the film before anyone saw it. A 2019 review from Rolling Stone also noted that incels were enraged by Larson's press tour, where she pushed for more female inclusion in male-dominated superhero films.
No, she specifically advocated for feminist ideological domination in those spaces. The issue is, as usual, you can't tell the difference between feminism, the ideology, and women, the variety of human. And that's the issue. We're not saying don't include female characters. We're saying please don't make characters who are one-dimensional mouthpieces for ideological gobbledygook. Which, by the way, is exactly what we used to say about tradcon evangelical Christianized moralism. Because the issue isn't the morality you're spewing, the issue is that you're spewing it at all, frankly. No one likes characters who are nothing but mouthpieces for either the writers or, more aptly, an ideology that the writers can't seem to look past. And it doesn't matter which ideology we're talking about, if your character is a non-entity and is simply a often very confrontational moral mouthpiece for an ideology, that character is not going to be as likable as characters who can function as at least seemingly independent entities in their own right. And even if the character can occasionally function as an independent entity in its own right, if that character isn't enjoyable or engaging enough, or if it's actively spiteful, no matter how it's framed as the hero, people will treat it like a villain because people notice when characters are spiteful, vindictive, and belittling, which is much of Captain Marvel's problem as a character, a lot of which is informed, apparently, by the actual beliefs, the actual espoused beliefs in interviews and so forth, and the actual personality quirks of Brie Larson. Because people liked Captain Marvel long before Brie Larson showed up. It wasn't until Brie Larson that people stopped liking the character because of the way her performance and her as a person informed the character. Because here's the thing. Marvel has always been very good about allowing the actor to put bits and pieces of themselves into the character. Look at Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr. Look at Chris Evans and Captain America and so on. We're not opposed to allowing actors to inform the character in some way, but if you are a truly unlikable bint of a human being, then you informing the character will actually allow for that character to also be a truly unlikable bint of a human being, and therefore people will unsurprisingly not like the character. And if it happens to be their first exposure to that character, which it might be because Carol Danvers is a fairly obscure character, or was before Marvel insisted on making her the flagship against all logic, people's the normie first impression of a character might lead some of them to say, I don't like Captain Marvel, period. And geeks like me would argue with them and say, no, trust me, the character in the comic was better. Just like with She-Hulk. She-Hulk as a character in the comics, amazing character. Fun to be around. Interesting character. Likes her life and enjoys engaging in it. The She-Hulk of the show, however, was a bitter, middle-aged, gender studies obsessed, high achiever who was miserable in all circumstances and actively hated on men, the alleged patriarchy, and anything that could be misconstrued as female oppression derp. And as such, people didn't like the way she was portrayed in the show, even though a lot of people like her in the comics. The same is true here. Moving on.
Right. Also, hello, Silverton Gaming.
Hi, Ahsoka.
We're covering an class I'm not entirely sure if we have covered before or just covering now. Yeah, we want to basically kill the character. We want to just unlikable. Character in the comics right now isn't back here. Of course, after beating shit out of Black Child. Fair enough.
I mean, again, the main issue with how they're writing her now is they insisted on making her both a ideologically feminist character and Marvel's flagship, even though no one who liked the character or knew the character at all was asking for either of those two things to happen. And in many ways, they modeled her portrayal in the comics off of both Kelly Sue DeConnick, who is responsible for largely ruining the character, and also, to some extent, Brie Larson's portrayal of the character. Neither of which is good.
Okay. Moving on.
Yeah, moving on.
This isn't Marston's first time dealing with her. I read that.
Mm-hmm.
Let me scroll down a bit. Seeing Marston back on the big screen undeterred has seemingly pushed some buttons, added in star power from Paris and Vellani, whose characters are vocal about how their Black and Pakistani American identities intertwine with their superhero lives. And the Marvels was a target of less than savory Marvel fans from the moment it was announced.
Yes, because none of the three main characters were all that likable. The scenario they were placed in was not all that interesting, and it had several continuity problems and tone problems and comedy problems. So, given that people were already predisposed to not liking most of these characters for various reasons, as I've already went over in Brie Larson's Captain Marvel's case, that character has been DOA from the get-go. In Kamala Khan's case, it's largely because of the odd mixture of Muslim identitarian crap and the hipster's impression of a geek girl thing that was most of her characterization, and the fact that they couldn't decide whether she was a Jinn or a mutant, and the fact that that was a change from the comics. In Monica Rambeau's case, she is probably the most likable of the three, all things considered, but she has the stink on her because rather than chasing the Scarlet Witch down like Thunderbolt Ross would chase the Hulk down after the events of WandaVision, she acted as a mouthpiece for the writers, said something completely nonsensical in universe that would have made no sense if the writers didn't put it there, and let Wanda off with basically a warning after she warped reality in an entire town and held people under an unknown, because I will stress this, Wanda did not know what she was doing for the majority of WandaVision, and as soon as she was made aware, she only paused long enough to say goodbye to her husband and children, which is fair enough. But she still did brainwash an entire town's worth of people in her grief and anger. And rather than chastising her for not having better control of her powers and chasing her down like Thunderbolt Ross would chase down the Hulk, Monica let her off. So even though Monica is probably the most liked out of the three of them, people still hate her for what she did in WandaVision.
Right. Moving on.
Moving on.
Whiny pushback hasn't prevented some fans from looking forward to Larson's upcoming film. The Marvel teaser trailer has been viewed 13 million times and currently is the #2 trending video on YouTube. Maybe that will give MCU fanboys something more concrete to cry over. Jesus Christ, this is so fucking spiteful.
Again, you can't just ignore people you don't like on the grounds that you don't like them. Whether you like them or not is immaterial to the fact that they still exist. If you wanted to prove that this backlash was false, there's a very easy way to do it, and I explained this in a previous segment on the Star Wars article last week. If you want to prove that a backlash is false, all you need to do is prove that the negative feedback was in some parts left by bots or people using multiple accounts to leave negative reviews. If you could do either of these two things, people would be much more inclined to believe you and side with you. However, if all you're doing, instead of mathematically invalidating them by showing that some of the accounts were fake or some of the accounts were people using multiple accounts, instead of doing that, which would actually mathematically invalidate them, you are seeking instead to morally invalidate them. And morality only belongs in the abstract dimension, i.e., it is immaterial to the fact of things that are. That's one of the reasons why Hume's famous quote was never derive a should from an is or a ought from an is. It's very simple. No matter how immoral you think people are, unless you up and kill them, they still exist. So you don't get to exclude them from your calculations just because you really would rather not because they're icky. Derp. Moving on.
Okay. So that was the end of that article.
That was surprisingly short.
Okay. So moving on to a Polygon article that Dalton sent me. Warhammer 40K explained.
I really wish Dragon Turtle was here for this, but he's busy doing IRL stuff apparently.
It's written by Cass Marshall. It published April 29th, 2023. Subheader is, that's right, we explain all 40,000 Warhammers.
Okay, I know that's a joke,
Dumbass
but that
joke.
is a cringy hipster joke. The Warhammer universe is set in the year, or rather, the 40k universe is set in the year 40,000 of the far future, of an alternate future. You ignorant fuck. And it's called Warhammer because large swaths of various factions in the setting are constantly going to war with each other because it's a grimdark nihilistic universe.
Moving on.
Moving on.
And this is pretty long, so we are probably gonna have to space this out.
Mm-hmm.
Warhammer 40.
I will try to keep my interruptions to a minimum.
You both know you're not going to. Let's be honest.
I will try. I make no promises, but I will try.
Warhammer 40,000 or 40k is a tabletop war game played with miniatures that first launched in the 1980s, alongside rulebooks packed with additional fluff and lore. Decades later, that fluff has sprawled out into its own massive narrative universe, and the lore has been adapted into novels, audio dramas, movies, animation, and video games. Warhammer 40k, the media property, is currently in pre-production as a TV and cinematic universe led by Superman and The Witcher star Henry Cavill. Meanwhile, the war game is out to into its 10th edition, which aims to be more accessible and hardbound than its previous versions. Okay, that is a lot.
Okay. Now,
Sorry, I want.
yeah, I did promise to keep my interruptions to a minimum, but it is very, very telling that nowhere in that paragraph did you mention Warhammer 40k is a fucking spin-off. Because the original Warhammer universe is a grimdark medieval fantasy setting. To try and explain 40k without even so much as mentioning the original Warhammer or Warhammer Fantasy is just stupid. 40k is a rare variety of spin-off that actually became more popular than its originator, but that doesn't mean at all that it isn't a spin-off anymore. 40k is a spin-off of Warhammer, and you didn't even mention it, which makes me anal retentively angry. But anyway, moving on.
Well, I did want to mention, good for Henry Cavill because he is a fan of Warhammer 40k.
Henry is a fan of a lot of things. Hopefully, 40k treats him better than DC or The Witcher did. But I don't hold my breath because I know they hate him for any number of microscopically unimportant moral reasons. Also, speaking of why mention original Warhammer, I am kind of upset with him that he skipped right to 40k and didn't even try to get anything Warhammer based off. I know everyone knows that 40k is more popular than the original Warhammer, but in the same way as I'm annoyed at this guy, the guy who wrote this article, for not mentioning that 40k is a spinoff, I'm kind of annoyed that no one tried to at least start with original Warhammer or Warhammer Fantasy at all. Anyway, it's a meaningless fanboy gripe on my part, I know, but someone please tell him that there are other variants of Warhammer for my sanity sake. Moving on.
Right. Okay. Yeah. What is Warhammer 40k? There's been little active curation of Warhammer 40k canon. Instead, Games Workshop and its publishing arm Black Library has taken the stance that everything ever written about its sprawling lore is true. All of it is canon, more or less, since its inception in the 1980s. Just like actual history, no single narrator or historian in the grim darkness of the far future is 100% reliable, Instead, it's up to the reader to sift through all the dusty and highly collectible tomes in order to parse its primary sources.
Okay, that is a somewhat stupid thing to say. However, I really need to use the bathroom, so I will be right back.
Okay. Well, just us here, folks. Unlike Dalton, I'm not a singer, so well, I guess we should have mentioned this earlier, given our preferences. I didn't want to prefix the rest of this article as I I'm not like the biggest fan of Warhammer 4K. I am relatively aware of things and stuff. I just I'll be honest, I prefer fan works over the official things, but also just given is the grim darkness of it all, I'm not really drawn to it. Um, but yeah, nothing against the property itself. I do want to mention that. I can't really get into it just because again, it's over the top edginess, I suppose you could say. Um, Often I find myself enjoying more of the fan content. Uh, as I've mentioned many times on this podcast before, that I really like What If the Emperor Had a Text-to-Speech device from Gruva Alphabusa, who is a really fun creator on YouTube that unfortunately had to stop doing production of TPS uh, because of the rules and change of copyrighted things. I'm not entirely sure the whole thing with that, but now they're doing another sort of grim dark thing, which is World of Darkness, and I enjoy that a lot. It's called Hunter the Parenting if anyone wants to look that up. But yeah, um, I find Warhammer 40k specifically because I'm not as well versed as the original Warhammer as Dome is. I'm fascinated by it by some things, but I'm just not an avid fan, as I'm sure some people would be. So yeah, Do not go gentle into that good night, old age deformed and weary and close to day. Age waves against the dying of the light. The white man at the end knows dark is right, because the words
Okay, sorry about that. I was like this close to crapping my pants. So
uh, thank God, because I was really just reading poetry right before you came back. So,
you were what now?
reading poetry. I just started to read Do Not Go Gentle Into That Good Night by Dylan Thomas.
Well, I suppose I sing when I don't have anything to talk about, and you go away
Well,
from the mic, so I'm not one to talk.
I spent the first half just explaining that I'm not like the biggest fan of Warhammer 40k, just given the grim darkness of it all. Although I do prefer the like parodies and fan made stuff more.
Hmm.
Although granted, that is just kind of a given with me at this point.
I'm sort of on the other end where I don't like, or rather, I guess I should say, I've never played the tabletop aspect of 40k, but I really like the actual 40k universe, and I like what I suppose we're supposed to call the fluff a lot.
I mean, I like that stuff too. Like, it's interesting to learn about. It's just like it's not one of my favorite IPs to engage in.
No, it's pretty far down on the list, but at the same time, like, while the underlying nihilism of it all does bug me, um, there are interesting enough aspects of the actual like unlike something like The Boys, it's not just like nihilism isn't the only gimmick, if that makes any sense. Um, so there's enough three-dimensionality to it that I can overlook some of the nihilism, and most of the nihilism of the 40k universe is actually like confined to the universe. It's not something that the like it's not part of the quote unquote meta narrative, unlike something like The Boys, which is deliberately made to spite the superhero genre.
Right.
Um, but anyway, back on task.
Much like real history, it can be hard to piece everything together. Fan wild wikis, sorry, and forums can be esoteric and packed with proper nouns. Meanwhile, since the narrative has never been rebooted or retconned, there are few official on-ramps for new players. But it's possible to engage with the 40k fandom with a running start, gathering up bits of its nearly 40-year backstory as you go along. They created this
Oh,
genre with newcomers in mind and will pepper our primer with recommendations of games, books, videos, and even kind of factions that you might want to learn about.
okay, right. The thing about well, we don't really have a canon. Okay, no, that is categorically wrong. And so is the well, we never really retcon anything bullshit as well. While there is some narrative ambiguity where you can chalk it up to this is how this character interprets things, or this is a piece of lore that could cut one way or another way, or maybe there's a way you can have multiple perspectives on it. There is definitely a canon. It's not like the SCP universe where there are several, mutually interlocking multiple canons at once. Like there is, there aren't different Warhammer timelines. Is the thing that would be how you would do a loose canon thing, or if every single thing in the canon was considered an unreliable narrator. Um, that that might work, but as a general rule, know that it's wrong. There are hard and fast rules to the canon, and by virtue of the 10 freaking editions of 40k, and God only knows how many of original Warhammer or Warhammer Fantasy, there have been retcons. there have been many retcons or additions to the canon to hopefully flesh out the canon more, or in some cases just to incentivize the buying of more or a new and unique set of merch. For example, are Chaos Dwarves canon anymore? Are there to what degree do the Sisters of Battle impact on the battlefield? How many different kinds of Astartes are there? How many different chapters of Astartes are there? Was the Warhammer universe the same as the 40K universe or not? These things are very often in flux, and let's not even get into the actual events, like the comic book style world changing events like the end times and what they've done to the respective canons. So no, you can take this, well, everything is multiple choice, everything is unreliable narrators, everything is non-canon thing, and shove it up your ass. You want to see how that's done properly, look at the SCP universe. There are like 5 or 6 different independent timelines of the SCP, canon that could that overlap enough that they might all exist in the same universe or might not, or you can have a multiverse type situation where it's true here and not true here, etc. That's how you do this kind of, well, everything is simultaneously in canon and out of canon, and it's kind of a multiple choice thing for the reader. Moving on.
Warhammer 40K setting. Warhammer 40K. Warhammer 40K began as a pastiche of science fiction and fantasy tropes. For instance, looking back at its inception in the late 80s, you'll find elements from Frank Herbert's Dune, with the God Emperor, a hatred of AI, and the spacefaring navigators. But early on, you'll also find more literary callbacks, including nods to John Milton's Paradise Lost.
You're stretching that significantly. There's not that much Paradise Lost to be found here. There's a lot more in common with something like Halo or The Matrix or Blade Runner or something like that. That you could even make the argument of something like Stargate or other like ancient alien infused thing. The Fifth Element would be another good example of inspirations that 40K is 40K has taken inspiration from a lot of things because basically the setting is a setting made of a lot of pieces of other people's settings. Which to be fair, that's how you can create a good and unique setting if you're creative enough to take bits and pieces of other people's settings, combine them in new and interesting ways, and add a little bit of your own shit. So I'm not disputing you, but stripping it all down to just Dune and Paradise Lost is a little silly. I mean, there's obvious connections between the history of the Roman Empire and the 40K universe. There's obvious reference to, even in 40K, there are references to, medieval Europe, especially during the inquisitorial times, etc. Like, also, and I feel like a broken record here, but why no mention of the fact that 40K is a spin-off of Warhammer? Especially because one of the things that makes 40K so interesting is in 40K you have a situation where a universe basically starts as a fantasy universe in Warhammer and evolves into a hyper-convoluted sci-fi series by the time of 40K. And you could also talk about the Warhammer multiverse, which would actually give you a better foundation for that, well, everything is canon and nothing is canon thing you were trying to pull earlier. But never mind.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving on.
In its earliest work, Warhammer 40K, or 40,000 Rogue Traders, written by Dick Priestley, begins with a preamble, a kind of Star Wars style opening crawl that lays out the most basic facts that the reader needs to know. It's been changing.
Okay, I'm gonna steal from Arch here because he's the main reason why I know this, but Rogue Trader wasn't originally a 40k book. In many ways, Rogue Trader was sort of proto 40k. And again, I'm giving all credit to Arch or Arch Warhammer on that one. Because he is the reason why I know that. But nevertheless, Rogue Trader wasn't originally a 40k book. It was proto 40k, if anything. Moving on.
Right. All right. It's been changed and altered over the years, but here are the original words from 1987. Sorry. For more than 100 centuries, the emperor has sat immobile on the golden throne of earth. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods and master of a million worlds by the might.
The God Emperor is mostly the master of mankind by his own will, because in most
From 1987, so
right, but in most permutations of the actual canon, the God Emperor hates the shit out of gods in general, and originally wanted to deliberately drive humanity into an age of atheism, which is one of the tragic things about the way and things ended up, because he originally wanted humanity to be self-sufficient and no longer need him, but he failed and they ended up worshipping him as a god, therefore basically creating the exact problem he worried about. But anyway, moving on. I know that it's different now. But actually, didn't they just say that like the canon hasn't changed at all in the previous paragraph?
I don't, I don't know, man. You're asking the wrong guy here.
No, but in the previous paragraph of this article, didn't they all but say the canon hasn't changed at all over the course of 10 editions and yada yada yada?
More or less,
Like
yeah.
wrong. Your own article has just disproved the thing you said. Either 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 Rogue Trader takes precedent because it came first, in which case all the stuff about the God Emperor hating gods in general is non-canon, which would be stupid because that's the majority of the canon, or things have changed since Rogue Trader, in which case citing it is somewhat silly. Moving on, though.
Let me reread that sentence. He is the master of mankind by the will of the gods, and master of a million worlds by the might of the inexhaustible army. He is a rotting carcass, rising invisibly with power from the dark age of technology. He is the Carrion Lord of the Imperium, to whom 1,000 souls are sacrificed every day, and for whom blood is drunk and flesh eaten, human blood and human flesh, the stuff of which the Imperium is made. To be a man in such times is to be one amongst untold billions. It is to live in the cruelest and most bloody regime imaginable. This is the tale of these times. It is a universe you can live in today. But this is a dark and terrible era where you will find little comfort of hope. If you want to take part in adventure, then prepare yourself now. To get the power of technology, science, and common humanity. To get the promise of progress and understanding. There is no peace among yourselves, only an eternity of carnage and slaughter, and the laughter of thirsty gods. But the universe is a big place, and whatever happens, you will not be missed. That is incredibly sad.
Yeah, that's dark as shit. Fortunately, it's not exactly true, but that's again kind of the irony of things have become more complicated in recent years. Why cite Rogue Trader? Also, Rogue Trader isn't 40k; it's sort of proto 40k. Also, why no mention of the fact that 40k is a spin-off of the original Warhammer? Anyway, moving on.
Alright, later rewrites of this piece add in references to the top-selling Space Marine comrades, but the bleakness of the God Emperor's reign has never been in question.
It's a far-flung theocracy. It's supposed to be a mixture of a semi-fallen version of the Roman Empire, and the Inquisition from the medieval era, but with spaceships and laser bolts and everything. It's basically what if the Roman Empire never fell and made it to spacefaring status, kind of. That's the best way I can summarize most of what you need to know about the Warhammer universe. It's a far-flung future where basically Rome never fell, became spacefaring, still converted to Christianity for some reason, only it's not Christianity, it's the emperor, and then, colonized the stars fighting, eldritch terrors and or aliens. That's that's a pretty solid way to sum up 40K, actually. But never mind.
You know?
Yep, moving on.
Meet the Imperium of Man. Before we delve into the finer details of the modern setting, it's clear that humanity should not be thought of as the good guys in 40K. From the very beginning of the franchise to the current day, the Imperium is one of the most villainous factions in the entire galaxy.
Okay, fuck.
As cruel, or perhaps more cruel to its own citizens than it is to outsiders, it considers to be a threat to its way of life.
Okay, fuck you officially, because while there are by no means any good guys in the 40K universe, none, niet, no point, they are all dead many thousands of years ago. Anyone who could meaningfully be called a good guy is long since dead in the 40K universe. To call the Imperium the most villainous faction is categorically factually wrong. Because for as bad as the Imperium is, and I will grant you that they are bad, they are, again, a mixture of the worst aspects of the Roman Empire and the worst aspects of the medieval Catholic Church during the Inquisition. Like, as bad as the Imperium is, and I will grant you that it's bad, no one of any kind should ever want to live with the Imperium. But there are no good guys in 40K, and certainly the Imperium is no worse than the other factions, because that would include who exactly? We have Chaos, or the servants of the four main powers, of the four divine powers, which are literally Lovecraftian abominations drawn from humanity's worst nightmares. You have the Necrons, who are essentially the Borg if the Borg species that spawned the Borg was born on a star that was constantly screaming in pain, and resulted in their planet also constantly screaming in pain, until they eventually became the Borg just to get away from the pain, and therefore have no conception of anything but pain. And also, they made a deal with a star vampire who turned them into mechanical abominations. You have the Tau, who are basically, actually, you know what? I would give you the Tau. The Tau might be the most humane of all factions in the 40K universe, and even then, they want to create a utopia, and so they basically want to conquer everything so everyone belongs to them and therefore can exist in their great utopia. You have the Eldar, who might be somewhat good factions if they weren't all to a man, pompous alien aristocrats. Basically take the elitism of Tolkien elves and magnify it by like 1,000 times, and then put them in a situation where their own careless hedonism resulted in the end of their entire civilization. Then there's the Dark Eldar, who are the results of their civilization being murder fucked to death. By the way, the Eldar murder fucked their civilization to death so badly that it literally created a god of hedonism who literally wants to murder fuck everything in the universe to death and or enslavement. But small print. But the Dark Eldar are mutant the mutant diseased, feral inbred versions of the Eldar who thrive off of literally sucking the life and suffering out of everything they come into contact with, sometimes including each other, but not limited to each other by any stretch of the imagination. I will give you that there are no good factions in 40k, and fuck the Imperium left, right, center, and sideways, but by no means go with any of the other options either. You have the orcs or the greenskins who are literally just hungry feral beasts who want to consume everything and are so literally warped stupid that they can warp reality into whatever they want just by believing it hard enough, but most of what they do with it is beat things up and eat them. There are no good guys in the 40k universe by any stretch of the imagination, but the Imperium is far from the worst of them. They're just god, they're brain-rendingly awful, but so is everything else in varying degrees. Moving on, though.
Okay, there's like a caption here, I guess. Not caption, but I don't know. Warhammer 40k was originally conceived as political satire and as an anti-fascist work of fiction. Nevertheless, over the decades, this hobby has attracted no small number of right-wing fans who buy into either the in-universe propaganda of the Imperium or the marketing materials that describe the Space Marines and Friends as noble protectors of humanity. In recent years, Games Workshop has spoken out against this fan movement, itself calling back to the original preamble penned by Priestley.
Okay, I didn't hear any of that. Read it again.
Okay. Warhammer 40k was originally conceived as a political satire and as an anti-fascist work of fiction. Nevertheless, over decades, the hobby has attracted no small number of right-wing fans who buy into either the in-universe propaganda of the Imperium or the marketing materials that describe the Space Marines and Friends as noble protectors of humanity. In recent years, Games Workshop has spoken out against this fan movement, itself calling back to the original preamble penned by Priestley.
Abjectly horseshit, sir. 40k was not conceived as a political satire. You might at best call it a historical satire. Maybe if you squint really hard and really stretch what you mean by satire and history. But mostly it was a satire of science fiction and a continuation of that original Warhammer that you're not mentioning, which itself was somewhat a parody of both a grimdark parody of both fantasy, but also with elements actually taken from real medieval history. Like, you could just about get away with saying that it's a satire of genre conventions, maybe. And even then, mostly just in the edgy 80s/90s way of, hey, what if we took all the worst aspects of actual real world history and applied it to a fantasy universe and then a science fiction universe? That's not political. Also, the Imperium isn't fascist. They're a theocracy. There might be some bleed over there, but they are in no way fascist. Most systems in the 40k universe don't even have a government as we would call it. They don't have what we would refer to as a state. In most planets in 40k don't have what we would consider to be a state, not even Imperium controlled ones. 40K is mostly a 40K is, or rather, the Imperium is mostly a theocracy in the form of the worship of the God Emperor, which is very similar to the worship of the Roman Emperor in Roman times, or to some degree the compliance with the Pope in medieval times. But yeah, no, the 40K universe isn't fascist. They're a theocracy with some elements of like parliamentary democracy, kind of, because the emperor tried to formulate a um, senate or a parliament chamber before he died, and then they started worshiping him like a god, even though he didn't want them to. Anyway, I've got to move again because I am once again falling out of the chair I'm in. Motherfucker.
Okay. The Imperium remains the franchise's normal main characters that give the larger fiction its point of view in most instances. They give the larger fiction, and absorb much of the spotlight. This is even more extreme with the Space Marines. Games Workshop's top sellers. Authors will often hype them up and praise their virtues, outright ignoring or otherwise skipping over uncomfortable topics like their tendency towards fascism and their origins as brainwashed child soldiers.
Oh, for the love. They're theocrats, you moron. They are not fascist. There has never been any Imperium information, so far as anyone knows, on any particular variety of any particular state. You could say there's some of that within the context of the Senate / Parliament that they have that I can't remember the name of. And there's some of that within the context of like the military structure of the Adeptus Astartes themselves. You could kind of say, but just because the Imperium is authoritarian and militaristic doesn't make it fascist. Because the authoritarian aspects of the Imperium come from the nihilistic nature of the setting itself, because in this universe, the collective beliefs of sapient life have resulted in the birthing of 4 eldritch abominations, stroke Lovecraftian entities that literally make the entire universe itself bleed hatred and or debauchery / excess of every unspeakable kind. Also, you can be militaristic without being fascist, and you can be authoritarian without being fascist, and the Imperium is a good example of how, because if anything, the Imperium is an authoritarian theocracy, you see. Just because they borrow aesthetics from the Roman Empire, and Mussolini did that too, kind of, doesn't mean that anything with Roman aesthetics and an authoritarian militaristic frame of mind is fascist. The credo of fascism, as described by both Mussolini himself in his My Rise and Fall memoirs, and Giovanni Gentile, who was the main philosopher of his regime, is everything within the state, nothing outside the state, nothing against the state. When, as I just went over, the state structure of planets within the 40K universe, if they can be even said to have one half the frickin' time, varies considerably because the Imperium simply does not give a fuck about the state structure or the micromanaging of any given planet, so long as they submit to the Imperium of Man and the glorious God Emperor. They're a little bit like Rome in that aspect. They don't care how you run your people or how you run your territory, so long as, at the end of the day, you are citizens of their empire and you make room for their god amongst your people. The only thing they don't have in common with Rome is the thing they have in common with medieval Christianity, in the sense that they don't like any other gods, they just like the God Emperor. But there's something of a good reason for that, because the four most powerful gods in this universe want to murder fuck everything to death in various ways. Moving on.
Right. So why are they so dang fun to read about? They Frank Herbert's Dune, Gothic Christian imagery ramped up to 11, and giant war machines. Throw them all in a blender and you get 40k deep stream of man. Battle nuns drop cathedral tanks from orbit on their enemies. The Adeptus Mechanicus, a transhuman faction of religious cyborgs, chant religious rites to the machine spirits inside tanks. The Astra Militarum, also known as the Imperial Guard, is a faction made of trillions of normal dudes in black armor, whose commissars urge them forward at gunpoint. It's a wild take on dystopian dark future sci-fi, far removed from any of our current problems. The Imperium fucking sucks to live in, but it's fun to read about. And they have one redeeming quality. They aren't the other guys.
Considering the other guys are various degrees of Lovecraftian abominations who want to murder fuck everything to death, that's probably a good thing. And that's the thing. People aren't in favor of the Imperium for the most part. Even the toxic quote unquote fascist fans you're referring to. People don't like the Imperium. They just prefer the fact that the Imperium are technically the human faction, and also they are slightly, more palatable than any of the other factions. And even then, there's a lot of fans who like playing the other factions simply by virtue of that sort of mustache twirling villainy quality that the other factions have. Um, but the main point I want to make in that particular section is if the 40k universe is so far removed from real world or modern day problems, why you insist on bringing up modern day problems or what you assume modern day problems to be, or modern day political paradigms like fascism, especially when if you actually look at the freaking way the universe functions, authoritarian militaristic theocracy is a much better descriptor of the Imperium in particular. Moving on. Oh wait, also wait, before I move on. The Adeptus Mechanicus aren't transhumanist because that would require some semblance of the idea that technology is better than humans. Which no. If anything, the Adeptus Mechanicus is what happens when you take the airplane cargo cults that some tribal societies um, took up when they saw airplanes for the first time during World War II to their logical conclusion. The Adeptus Mechanicus aren't transhuman; they're cargo cults taken to the logical extreme. Anyway, moving on.
That was a thing.
Yeah, a lot of tribes when a lot of specifically island tribes during World War II, when they saw planes for the first time, some planes would actually drop cargo on the the quote unquote primitive tribes in order to help them, and they got so accustomed to the resources that they essentially started worshiping the planes like gods. And when planes stopped dropping cargo because the war ended, because there was no need for the planes anymore, um, certain tribes would actually build uh, like straw effigies of planes to try and convince the planes to come back. And they essentially and after a couple of generations, they started worshiping the planes as gods or something similar to gods anyway. It's a bit more complicated than I'm making it, but I'm summarizing.
Okay, let me. Dark Tide is the best chance you'll have to explore Hive City for yourself. The level design and soundtrack are immaculate and make Warhammer 40k feel very tangible. So it's just recommending stuff. Check out them. Uh, Vault of Terra series by Chris Wright is a procedural crime drama that takes place on Terra at the foot of the Golden Throne itself. That sounds interesting, I'm not gonna lie.
A lot of 40k sounds really interesting. Although again, I still I'm gonna bring this up because apparently no one else is going to. Warhammer is also really, really interesting, and I wish people like the thing that makes 40k more popular than Warhammer, I think, is that because 40k takes from so many different various resources, it is a more unique setting than Warhammer because Warhammer is basically what if we took real world history, specifically the dark, fucked up parts of real world history, and plopped it in a dark fantasy setting. Whereas 40k takes bits and pieces from so many different things and unites them in such a unique tapestry that to some degree I think 40k is more overtly unique than Warhammer. But Warhammer's still pretty freaking amazing actually.
Mhm. The Inquisition novels by Dan Abnett made up a sprawling trilogy packed full of day-to-day life for the poor souls of the Imperium and the Inquisitors who watch over them. Firecast by Peter Verhoeven is an Apocalypse Now homage told through the tale of Imperial Guard soldiers pursuing warriors of the Talon Empire. Okay. Alright, so this last thing we're going to cover, then we're going to move on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so from 15k to 40k. The Imperium is based on real-world history, but since it's so far in the future, there are some gaps in the timeline. We know that the Emperor of Mankind and his closest group of allies are perpetuals, immortal humans that are reborn into new vessels after perishing. They've been in the background of all of history, pulling strings and setting up pieces on the chessboard. Here are some of humanity's historical areas that end up setting the scene for 40k.
The status of perpetuals is somewhat in flux. Because we don't know how many perpetuals there actually are, or if even the God Emperor counts as one, because the few perpetuals other than him we've actually seen are significantly less powerful than him, and some of them might even be related to him, so his status as a perpetual is somewhat weird, all things considered. Also, the canonicity of perpetuals themselves is also somewhat weird at any given point in the 40k canon. Um, Also, the main issue that I have, as a somewhat casual enjoyer of the lore slash fluff, um, in a sane world that or in a world that I would prefer, I would have it that the 40k universe and the Warhammer universe are the same universe, but sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not true. It's somewhat in flux. And then there's the whole end times thing where it turns out there's multiverse shenanigans going on and both exist, but they're in separate universes, yada yada yada. But nobody likes the end times.
Dark Age of Technology, 15,000 to 25,000 AE. Current event. Long after we were all gone, humanity hit its pinnacle and created a fully automated space utopia. Then the AI-controlled Men of Iron rose up to kill humanity and almost succeeded. This is why AI has been outlawed in 40k. An acronym now stands for Abominable Intelligence.
Again, this is half true at best. We don't actually know if the Men of Iron were robots or if they were cyborgs or what the fuck was going on. We also don't really know that much about the Men of Gold or the Men of Silver. Because the Men of Gold, Men of Iron, Men of Silver, Men of Lead thing, it's a takeoff of a concept from Greco-Roman mythology that gets a sci-fi update here because it's 40K. But the various versions of the Men of Iron, Men of Gold, Men of Silver, Men of Copper story, like, it changes at the drop of a freaking hat most of the time. That, although their version is not even the most likely interpretation, it's highly probable that either the Men of Iron were augmented humans or that this doesn't refer to technology assisted humans at all and was part of the God Emperor's genetic meddling. But that's, again, this article is very obviously trying to tell its own very, ideological and politicized version of this story. Mostly the AI are outlawed because the God Emperor worried about them actually developing warp demons inside them, and so they use servitors instead for most things. Because at least servitors are at least partially biologically human. Whereas, essentially, the Imperium is so worried about a ghost in the machine because in the case of the 40K universe, a ghost in the machine could very easily become a demon in the machine, and then you'd wind up with creatures of Tzeentch or creatures of Khorne or creatures of Slaanesh or whoever popping out of the machine and killing everyone that's involved with it. Or just taking control of the machine and killing everyone that's involved with it. Anyway, moving on.
Okay. In its place is a kind of horrific bioengineering which uses human minds and bodies as the materials for new robot-like entities like servo skulls and servitors. The Dark Age tech that survive usually crops up again and again in the modern timeline, has some kind of problem, but we otherwise know very little about this era.
Again, it depends on how much you actually take GW's retcon seriously, because many times they've given more insight into the age of technology, and then said, "Whoops, that's not canon." Same thing with the Horus Heresy. They very often would just go, some parts of this are canon, some parts of this aren't canon. You figure it out. Who cares? Buy our shit. Moving on.
The Age of Strife, The Long Night, the space travel shut off, and the Men of Iron revolt, leaving humanity in ruins. The survivors start a civil war, Mad Max Fury Road style.
No. The space travel is fucked because the warp is a domain of murder fucking chaos gods, pretty much. Basically, the Eldar were the children of a somewhat godlike race called the Old Ones, and the Old Ones taught the Eldar how to literally use gods as technology, as in they could literally make gods for specific purposes in the same way we would make like robots. Unfortunately, the Eldar got so bored with the utopian state of their civilization that they started engaging in massive hedonistic orgies of food and sex and murder and what have you. And this debauchery eventually led to the creation / birth of a new chaos god called Slaanesh, who then proceeded to murder fuck their entire civilization to death, pretty much. and her four siblings, Erstat siblings, I should say, basically are now the four most powerful forces in the 40k universe with regards to the metaphysical or immaterium as it's called. And so if you go beyond the mundane dimension in the 40k universe, you will probably be murder fucked or assaulted by various kinds of demons. And that's what makes and the warp used to be what made space travel possible, so space travel is varying degrees of not possible anymore because nobody wants to be murder fucked to death by various kinds of demons or the chaos gods that rule them. Moving on.
Alright, but across multiple star systems, the until mankind showed up on the main stage, created a faulty race of transhuman soldiers known as the Thunder Warriors, and forcibly united humanity under his banner. Large parts of the race were stranded because their faster and light tech went down with the dark age of technology, and they were left to face constant assault and enslavement from alien demons. That makes
Again,
no
again, you like the term transhuman a little bit too much here because that's not what that means. What you're describing is genetic experimentation, but there's nothing explicitly transhuman about that. You could say superhuman, and that might be accurate, or you could say parahuman, and that might be accurate, but transhuman it is not. I hate to be all Indigo Montoya on you, but you keep using that word. I don't think it means what you think it means. Moving on.
mm. Uh, the Great Crusade. The Emperor used his gang of genetic scientists to improve upon the Thunder Warriors who were all dying horribly. The first step was to create 20 perfect sons based on the Emperor's own DNA, but Chaos interfered by taking these Primarchs and leading them to the far corners of the galaxy. The Imperium of Man began to scour at the stars, searching for the Primarchs even as it began bringing all human worlds back into the fold, whether they wanted to join or not. During this time, two Primarchs were disappeared by the Imperium for unknown reasons and permanently scrubbed from the historical record.
Again, the whether the Chaos faction yeeted the Primarchs is not largely the reason why they fell, or why a significant portion of them fell. A lot of them just left Earth on the orders of the God Emperor, and in the course of being away from Daddy too long, they factionalized and got their own ideas about how to handle things. And because they were genetically nigh perfect, they and they didn't have Daddy to tell them to not get the fuck off. They all they basically specialized into their own little niches, but because that's not what they were supposed to do, Chaos was for varying reasons allowed to or able to interfere with them. Particularly Horus Lupercal, who was probably the best of the Primarchs, but Chaos wouldn't allow that to happen, and so Khorne and company basically turned him into a blood crazed uber militarist, and then he went insane. Moving on.
Right. The Horus Heresy. The Horus Heresy is the civil war that followed the Great Crusade. For those living in the current time of 40k, the Heresy and even the Primarchs themselves are the stuff of myth and legend, only known through the practices of an imperial cult and scraps of history passed down through the generations. Their story, set in the year 2030k, 30,000, has become so popular that it's now its own standalone war game, accompanied by over 60 novels. This is a big Greek tragedy where half the Primarchs follow chaos and rebel against their tyrannical father. In the end, Horus is obliterated, the Emperor is badly wounded, leading to the slow decay of the Imperium and the institutionalization of a mandatory religion worshipping the god Emperor. Ironic,
Okay,
hold on. Ironic considering the guy was a mega atheist, but he's too busy sitting on the golden throne, an ancient bit of tech that just barely manages to keep him alive, to have any say about it.
okay. Here's the thing. You sneaky little son of a bitch. The God Emperor was not a tyrant. For the most part, he loved and adored his sons and pampered them a little bit too much, frankly. Um, Only some of the novels portray him as a tyrant, mostly because the author in question had an axe to grind with the 40K universe, or didn't know how the canon was supposed to work. But by and large, the Emperor is not a tyrant. He is doing what he is doing because the world is harsh thanks to the, murder fucking chaos gods. And he is having to make hard decisions in order to stabilize humanity in absence, or rather in the presence of said murder fucking chaos gods. Because said murder fucking chaos gods can actually warp reality if they feel like it. Therefore, not only is the universe nihilistic because a lot of the people think it is, but because the gods insist on making it so. So even if there was no humans left in the 40K setting, the world would go on being fucked because when the four most powerful gods in your setting want to rape the universe to death in various different and unique ways, things get dark whether you like it or not. But no, he wasn't a tyrant. Unless you follow only the books that don't know how the canon works. He was a hard master because he had to be, because otherwise murder fucked by chaos gods. Moving on.
Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna finish reading this and then we're gonna call it on this article and move on.
Mhm.
Warhammer 40,000. This is the era that most fans of 40k, left or otherwise, think of when they think of the franchise, but for real-world decades, the main plot of the universe sat stagnant. There were no further progressions in the main setting. Instead, just new editions of the game that were pumped out on a roughly 3 year cycle. Instead, the Black Library and publishing arms of Games Workshop fleshed out what life is like in the Imperium Man with works like Dan Abnett's Inquisition novel, The Sandy Mitchell's Sisyphus, no, Typhus King novels. Small deaths always unfolded in this setting, but there were no major shakeups until recent years. Era and Dominus, 42,000 current year. The Gathering Storm campaign supplement books released in 2017. One Loyalist Primarch, Ultramarine and Administrator Extraordinaire, Gravite Gilliman returned. Unfortunately, around the same time, Chaos also split the galaxy in half, creating the Ciatrix Maledictum. Warhammer 40k and its extended materials have focused on the response to Gilliman's return and the new nature of the post-split galaxy. A second Loyalist Primarch, Lionel Johnson, has recently come as well, setting up a post-heresy grudge match for the future of the Imperium itself.
Everything in 42K is annoying, and the Ultramarines are also really annoying. I believe it to someone like Art to explain why, because while I've gotten the basic gist of it, I'm not qualified to explain in great detail. So everyone go and watch Arch to understand why the Ultramarines and 42K are annoying. Anyway, moving to the next thing.
Sorry, I was setting it up.
Mm-hmm.
So we're continuing on from where we last left off with this video, which is from Renegade Cuts. This video is not about Batman. We're starting at 6 minutes, and if you guys want to see the first half we covered, that is in podcast number 200.
Spoiler version, he explains the in-universe logic of why Batman doesn't or actually how Batman does give to charity, and then proceeds to completely ignore the in-universe logic and whine about capitalism for like 10 minutes. And yet somehow ties it back into Batman because Batman is rich and that's his fault somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. But yeah, just for the sake of not taking up as much time as we did before, we are just going to go off where we left.
Mm-hmm.
Just because I know us, and if we start over, my God, we're going to be here for hours.
Yeah, it will take forever, so yeah. Batnana.
Now there is dawn. Just
Oh, wait. Hold on. Let me turn up the volume because I think I had it low. Okay. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? Actually, I am going to rewind it a little bit just so we have clarity because I think he stopped right when he was talking. So
Yeah, he was like mid-sentence or something.
yeah, so I'm just going to have it 5:50 then. Shall we?
Mm-hmm. Batnana.
of the film, because it is laid bare at the climax where it's supposed to be, and because it is foreshadowed many times, and that this is the progression of the protagonist's character arc. It was dark, but now there is dawn. Justice has been served. Batman is a hero, a pseudo-biblical figure that leads his people from bondage and sends them towards the heavens. Whatever else this is.
What the fuck?
No, there is no biblical themes in the Batman, and frankly, once again, the fact that you can completely ignore in-universe logic or characterization and devote yourself entirely to themes is counterproductive, ahistorical, pseudo-intellectual gobbledygook. For explanation as to why and how, go watch the previous episode where we talked about this. Because I don't feel like regressing my brain back to that point just to better refute this.
Right. Again, that's podcast 200.
And what podcast number are we on?
219.
Okay, so it hasn't been that long. It feels longer than that. But, oh well.
I don't know if that's a good or bad thing, to be honest.
I think it's just my brain's desire to repress the stupidity of his art school educated nonsense.
Anyway, shall we?
Yep, Batnana.
Batman.
Rest assured that this is justice. This is what the movie is trying to say. A post-structuralist approach might say that at the end of the film, Batman uses different words to describe Gotham City and his mission, and he is visually represented differently, but he still mythologizes crime as a force of nature, or human nature.
Because it kind of is. Because entropy exists, therefore no system is going to function perfectly at all times and in all circumstances. Even if you could create a utopia, that utopia would be subject to the forces of decay. And human nature is subject to things like evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology, which are also subject to entropy and decay. So, yeah. Also, false equivalency, because you're not making meaningful differentiation between the words he's using at the beginning of the movie and the words he's using at the end of the movie. But well, it's been a while since I've watched The Batman, and well, it's been a while since I watched the first half of your video, Leon. My guess is there is a meaningful distinction between the two things, which you are completely glossing over because you want to be post-structuralist about it, because you don't care about in-universe logic, in-universe characterization, the history of Batman as an IP, or the textures or visuals that the movie actually presents. You only give a shit about the tertiary meta-narrative for some fucking reason, and even then only slightly about that, because you would rather talk about other ideological bugaboos rather than address anything that's actually in the movie. Because here's the thing, most people don't even give a shit about authorial intent. They are capable of viewing the art as a thing in itself. Structuralism nerfs that entirely, which is counterproductive, and post-structuralism takes that nerfing to the next level and basically becomes a narcissistic pseudo-intellectual exercise in nonsense. But anyway, moving on.
Right. Get the tab. Checking comments. There are none.
Yep. Batnana.
Within the film, there are multiple
explicit references to income inequality and a passing reference to a comorbidity of racial inequality and income inequality. But this is all practically suppressed by what Batman tells the audience both before and after his character arc is complete. The audience for the Batman is expected to have a cultural bias about criminogenic.
Okay, Leon, the reason why those things are not considered central to the movie, okay, is ironically because they are just there as window dressing to pander to people like you. They are not at all central to the in-universe logic of the universe that we're operating in, or the characters operating within it. However, because I assume Matt Reeves knows significantly that a bunch of people like you, or a bunch of people on Twitter who try to be like you, will focus only on whatever they think he was trying to say, because people care more, for some people care more about authorial intent than what's actually in the fucking movie. So he gave you all some window dressing, because apparently we can't actually examine the art as a thing in itself. We can't examine the characters or universe as things in themselves and actually have meaningful thoughts about them. No, the author has to come in and act like a condescending school teacher and explicitly state, this is what I was trying to say, as though that even freaking matters to anything. Even though it's probably not at all what he was trying to say. As I said, he probably was just trying to pander to you and give you guys some kind of out, because for some reason you can't look at a piece of art and see it as a three-dimensional thing to be examined and analyzed on your own terms or on its own terms. You have to see it as a one-size-fits-all, this is what the author meant, therefore that is the only correct interpretation, derp. Or this is what I think of this content, therefore that also can only be the only interpretation of this somehow. Usually some combination of both. Anyway, moving on. Batnana. Unless Brainstormer left. I think he did. Yeah, the last comment I see is the one about the cargo cult that we mentioned earlier. So, no comments from Ahsoka as yet. I kind of assume Brainstormer went to go get food. And if I am correct in this, then goody for me. If not, then I will correct myself when he comes back. Oh, I I see. It must have been a technical issue. Do 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 do. There are no good bat themed songs. I can't make the theme. I can't make the song appropriate for the subject matter, unfortunately. And I'm not going to pull a Peter Griffin and literally just sing the Tim Burton theme that then eventually morphed into the Batman DC Animated Universe theme. But while he is doing that, though, yeah, I don't see any more recent comments from Ahsoka. Damn it!
I'm back.
Huzzah!
Yeah,
Technical
sorry.
difficulties.
Yeah.
I guessed food, but I think I was wrong.
No, I ate for stream, so. What did I miss?
Basically, just me railing about how dare you assume the movie was trying to say anything, and how authorial intent isn't the same as the movie's intent, even if the movie does have an intent, and how most people don't look at things even from the structuralist perspective, let alone the post-structuralist perspective.
Okay. Shall we bat Nana?
We shall bat Nana. About criminogenic conditions, the circumstances that produce crime. The Batman ritualistically moralizes crime and speaks in platitudes that are originally dark, eventually uplifting, but always vague, and most importantly, apolitical. The passing reference to the conditions that create crime are covered under the banner of an apolitical unity that...
Yes, because some people can tell the difference between philosophy and politics, Leon. In fact, some people prefer philosophy over politics. Also, could it be that the subject matters you're talking about are complicated and nuanced, and therefore some level of abstraction is probably warranted about them? Could it be that the issues in question aren't a universally settled subject matter, and therefore looking at things in a broader context might make more sense? Or could it be that all this political gobbledygook you've been seeing was window dressing to appeal to people like you? Meanwhile, most people are more concerned with things like characterization and in-universe logic for their own sakes, because people view art from a Michelangeloist perspective, i.e., the purpose of the art is the art in and of itself, rather than some authoritarianly contrived authorial intent or tertiary theme. Because that's the thing, Leon. Most people don't look at movies from the perspective of the themes and or what the movie is trying to say is all that matter. People care about things like shot composition, in-universe logic, characterization, world building, etc. But you can ignore or simultaneously both know and ignore all of the above in favor of themes which are at best tertiary and at worst actively spiteful and counterproductive, or hyperfocus on the artist, even though in classical antiquity artists were seen kind of like mediums in that they were channeling ideas rather than coming up with them of their own free will. God, I wish we could return to the idea that the art exists for its own sake and not for the sake of the artist's ego or some secondary or tertiary themes. But I can but dream, and I can but hope, I suppose. Moving on.
Okay.
Bet Nana. Unless you have something to add.
No, honestly, it's so stupid to the point I don't have a logical.
Your brain just can't understand how he goes from there to there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't blame you. Like I said, I only know how to do this because I also went to college and was force-fed a bunch of this bullshit. So I at the very least know how to think in those terms and also how to unravel those terms when necessary. Which is why I hate most of what modern day education has become. Because we can't ever just look at things for their own sake. It always has to be some quasi-utilitarian, we're weaponizing the art for the sake of X, Y, and Z thing. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah.
Batman.
Tends to ignore disparate racial and economic power dynamics. In the film, the company called the Gotham Renewal Corporation, originally intended to assist Gotham City, has been corrupted by a series of criminals. In the end, these criminals are exposed or pushed out, and the day is saved. This relies on the presupposition that our systems are good and are only corrupted by...
Oh, okay, so I have something to say. That one, it is not a corporation. It is a plan that was developed by the city.
Yeah, it's a government institution.
So you're already being, I want to say, logically insincere.
He's starting from a broken premise because he wants this to be a diatribe against capitalism rather than paying attention. It comes back to one of my most famous criticisms of Gary from Neurotic Channel. If you're going to criticize a movie that you're watching, try at least watching the movie you're watching instead of rewriting it in your own head as though your own interpretation is the first position rather than an interpretation of something that exists separately from you. Because they do this all the, and I feel sorry for mentioning Gary because Gary mostly doesn't do this, but he did it in the case of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, which is what made me think of it. But in a lot of cases, people will interpret something, forget that they did that, and act as though their interpretation and the actual, thing that exists to be analyzed are the same thing. They will act as though their interpretation is the first position rather than a secondary position drawn from the actual material. And it frustrates me to no end. Could it be that a Batman movie wasn't necessarily even about, criminology or the wider society of how crime works, Leon? Have you ever considered that? Have you ever considered that socio-political gobbledygook has its place and that place isn't in art? Or if it is in art sometimes, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's in art all times. And even when it is there, it's probably best to treat it like secondary or tertiary information rather than primary information. Anyway, I feel like a broken record because it's the same criticism over and over again because it won't register to him. But anyway, moving on. Batman.
Bad apples. What is vengeance in the Batman anyway? Is Batman saying he simply needs to exercise a lighter touch? Because it feels like what Batman is instead pushing back against is corruption and radicalism. Corruption in the form of renewal, and radicalism in the form of those who oppose renewal, the Riddler and his people, and Catwoman's willingness to use more...
Okay, hold on. I know you're going to have something, but...
Please go. Please go.
Okay. Riddler was not against renewal, mainly because renewal, that whole thing, it was fucked from the beginning, years prior to the actual events of the movie. That's one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And Riddler, honestly, it's not even a radical. Like, okay, like what you said earlier, Don. This guy is like looking at it from a very like weird perspective, and given that the actual thing is, he's taking like Riddler. This is more personal to him than anything.
Yeah. He feels dejected specifically by the Waynes and tries to take it out on the world.
Yeah. I had some and vengeance. Well, if you're asking what it is, then you would clearly, and I don't want to come off as kind of an asshole with this, but you clearly didn't watch the movie or pay attention enough to understand that Bruce in this movie, when he's talking about vengeance, he is being so, like it's even mentioned in interviews, is like he sees every criminal as the one that took his parents from him.
The problem is it's not put in the quasi-academic language he would prefer. So I will try to translate from pseudo-intellectual moron to average human. And feel free to correct me if you think I'm missing the mark.
Sure.
The difference between vengeance and justice in the context of the Batman, or in the context of Batman in general, if you like, but particularly in this movie, is vengeance is retributive and vindictive. Justice is a matter of logic and principle. That's the difference. Bruce in the context of this movie is being specifically retributive and vindictive rather than operating from an intellectual or logical place. And so the movie is there to show him acting basically on nothing but vindictive, spiteful emotion is a childish, evil way to handle things, and that he should take a step back and internalize things from an intellectual standpoint rather than a emotional one as much as possible. Because operating with violence, especially without any guiding principles or restrictions, will result in a downward spiral of chaos and destruction. That's the main arc he goes through. He goes from being a short-sighted, vindictive little shit who wants retribution and vindication to someone who is concerned not with himself but with the actual functioning of the world, or dealing with humans as though they are three-dimensional figures rather than dolls he can punch, more or less. Am I anywhere near the mark, or am I completely off here?
Yeah, I agree, and I also kind of want to add, like again, I think I said this when we were doing the review of the movie. The big thing, yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to get on my topic.
Take your time.
For most of the movie, he has a very black and white, extreme version of people and motivations and stuff. It's almost childlike, like you said before. Like you said.
It's a place of it's coming from a place of like narcissistic injury. Everything is about me, and people hurt me. Therefore, I'm gonna punch things until I feel better.
Yeah, and he had people that constantly challenge him in that regard, and his belief of that. Catwoman, Jim, to an extent, I suppose. The cop, the one like regular police officer, and honestly, kind of had kind of an arc. You saw that kind of trust, beginning to trust Batman and stuff. Can't remember the guy's name. I feel bad. It's actually pretty cool.
Even the Riddler is there primarily to contrast his myopia, pretty much. If it if it could be said that all that socio-political gobbledygook that you keep hyper-focusing on has a purpose, the purpose is that. The purpose is treat humans like humans, not cardboard cutouts to direct your rage at, Bruce.
Yeah. And again, Riddler's also like a lot of Batman villains are good like cases of what happens if Batman goes to this extreme or something like that.
Yeah, the dark mirror, basically.
Yeah.
All of Batman's villains are him reacted through some angle of a prism, basically.
Yeah. And Riddler in this movie, and I guess universe, is very much what you said, like narcissistic hurt, not
narcissistic injury.
Yeah.
Everything is about me, and I have been hurt, so I'm going to take it out on the rest of the world, and woe betide anyone who gets in my way.
With Riddler, again, in the case of like comparison to Bruce, like parallel, is the direct contrast. Like if Bruce kept going on, he could have become the Riddler, effectively. Like in terms of mentality, aggression, destructiveness.
Yeah. And it's one of the main reasons why I really wish they had kept the Joker scene in, because speaking of dark mirrors, apart from the fact that, the Joker as basically a Hannibal Lecter stand-in has been something I've been begging for years, it's a perfect counterweight to what's going on with this version of Bruce in this movie.
Yeah. Anyway, we talked long enough.
Yep, Batnana.
People and Catwoman's willingness to use more violence than Batman is willing to use. Radicals are portrayed as only seeking vengeance instead of justice, and the audience's presuppositions about our systems and about radicalism are what makes this ring true to them in the end. In the Batman, justice seems to be working within our institutions. The Batman recognizes corruption and acknowledges...
No. It's not radicalism that is the problem. It is violent, emotionally driven vindictiveness that is the problem. And once again, Leon, you put the cart before the horse. Most people don't look at society and say, what does society say, therefore that is good. They look at what they actually individually think. And then if society is operating based on what they actually individually think, then that society is doing good. And there is almost no one on this earth that is so psychotically addicted to norms that they would rather live in a society that is orderly but miserable than a society that is quote-unquote radical but actually meets with their criteria for justice. And the main problem you're having, Leon, is you assume, essentially tabula rasa, you assume people are blank slates to be written on by society, rather than that society is an emergent phenomena created by the actions of individuals. Because here's the thing, and this is somewhat of a sidebar, but it's a meaningful sidebar, I think. Society doesn't actually exist. Like, not as a separate entity unto itself. Society is what happens when the accumulated actions of individuals overlap and intermingle with one another. Society isn't a solid construct, or an entity unto itself. Society is an organic result of people and their actions and their thoughts and their deeds and so on. Like that is one of the fundamental issues here. You think that society is this agent that can act on people, when in actuality society is a bubble that is the result of individual actions. Now, there's some degree of symbiosis there, in which case, a person growing up in a particular society might take some influences from it, but that's not what you're saying. That's not what you said just now. What you said just now is society did society made people view this movie in X way, and that's why it's somehow immoral. That's the short version of what you just said. And if you think I strawmanned you, please go into detail as to how, rather than just calling strawman as though that in and of itself solves anything. Anyway, Batnana. Did your internet go out again, or were you away from the mic?
No, I just got up to get some more water.
Okay. That time it was food related. I should have put money on it.
You don't gamble.
Mm-hmm.
Also, I was trying to think if I had anything else to say, but no, I think I'm good. So.
Mm-hmm. Batnana.
Not just corruption, but recognizing corruption is not a condemnation of our institutions, because corruption is the institution not working as intended. Recognizing corruption only condemns corruption and may still tacitly endorse the institution. But what if the institutions, working as intended, create and enforce poverty?
What the fuck is he talking like? My God. He said corruption.
Okay, Leon. Let me explain to you what you just said and how nihilistic it is. You said, specifically, the institution working as intended. I'm going to hyper-focus on those two words, as intended. Because if you believe that someone somewhere intended for society to have a negative outcome, then you believe that there must therefore be someone somewhere, there must be some evil cabal creating the flaws of society intentionally. And that is inherently nihilistic. This comes back to Hanlon's razor, my friend. Never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence. Or, in this case, corruption. Because on the broadest scale, corruption is a kind of, long-term result of incompetence. You either can believe that human beings are neutral, that is to say, both positive and negative, not that they are blank slates, but that human beings are largely some degree of neutral, and that therefore bad things happen as a result of either the dilapidation caused by some bad things happening to some people, or through sincere incompetence. But in order to use the phrase that you just used, the phrase as intended in relation to society's negativity, you must therefore conclude from your own statement that in order for you to be correct about society functioning as intended, and that intention still resulting in negativity, you must therefore conclude that someone knowingly and willfully made society wrong, and that therefore there must be some evil cabal that created society in the first place. Neither of these things are charitable or plausible. Both of these things, both of these assumptions are what Hitchens would call an extraordinary claim. And as Hitchens always said, an extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence. To believe that some random cabal of evil people is at the top of society and making its negative qualities happen on purpose, instead of being the result of incompetence, entropy, or corruption, is an extraordinary claim that is also extremely uncharitable to your fellow human beings, Leon. You can say that someone, centuries ago, millennia ago, however long you want to say, acted in good faith with the information they had at the time and simply didn't have all the information, and that resulted in negativity. That I would kind of agree with you on. you can say that some people are incompetent or stupid enough to be malicious, and that resulted in some corruption. But in order to say society is functioning as intended, it just so happens that that intention was evil, and therefore the results being evil is society functioning as intended, which is basically what you said. That requires there to be a mustache-twirlingly evil cabal of essentially supervillains controlling or creating society in the first place. And or that the base state of human nature is to be evil, which neither of these claims is logically or ethically defensible, sir. Piss off. Batman.
One sec.
What if they create and enforce injustice? What if they must be replaced by something more than reform, something that requires more than voting? Well, that's radicalism, and in the Batman, that is portrayed as vengeance, not justice. For only within our institutions can justice be found, no matter how much evidence exists to the...
No. The definition, as I already went over, of justice v. vengeance in the Batman has to do with emotionally driven vindictiveness, the need for vindication, and the need for retribution over principle, logic, or order. Principle, logic, and order are considered the good force. Emotionally driven vindictiveness, aggression, violence, and the need for vindication are considered the short-sighted, childish, bad force. Radicalism in and of itself is not a bad thing according to the narrative of the Batman. It is when that radicalism is derived, and only when that radicalism is derived from short-sighted, emotionally driven violence, the need for vindication, the need for retribution, and the need for vindication sans principle, forethought, or logic. Nothing was ever said about radicalism because whatever you may think about Batman, being a vigilante who dresses up as a bat and goes out and beats up criminals for the sake of his own personal trauma will always be a radical position. So it's certainly not Batman calling out radicalism because he views the situation in Gotham bad enough that he must do a radical thing like dress up as a bat and go out and beat up criminals in order to set the world right. He, however, does not condone vindictive, short-sighted, emotionally driven use of violence indiscriminately or without censure. That is the difference. I mean, radicalism is fine, at least according to the movie, as long as it doesn't involve emotionally driven, violent outbursts without restraint. Even if you hyper-focus on this meta-narrative bullshit, your interpretation of the meta-narrative is nevertheless still wrong. Batman.
No, I really don't know what to say, to be honest. I was trying to think if I did, but no. Anyway,
Batman.
Contrary. The mayor was dirty, but the new mayor will not be dirty. The bad politician is bad, but the good politician is good. Trust in liberal democracy. The police initially do not trust Batman, and there are dirty cops. But Batman tells Jim Gordon that he's a good cop. The bad police are bad, but the good police are good. Trust the police.
Okay.
As opposed to what, Leon? The only other option is varying degrees of nihilistic misanthropy where you trust no one, not even individuals, because as has been made perfectly clear to me, you despise the notion of individualism in this instance. You're not even arguing against capitalism or the system now. You're simply arguing against, it seems, anything resembling a charitable interpretation. And you're doing so on the behalf of this aforementioned cabal that you seem to think exists that created society intentionally bad. Not people acting on incomplete information, not the, overarching force of entropy that will inevitably decay all systems, not the flaws inherent in human nature because we're animals and evolutionary psychology and biology are a thing, but you said that maybe society is simply functioning as intended and those intentions were just evil. That is an incredibly misanthropic and nihilistic position to start from. Certainly less charitable and less intellectually and morally defensible than humans are flawed, society was created with a lack of entirely salient information, and therefore flaws are inevitably going to happen. But there's a secret cabal that created society intentionally wrong. That's you see how one of these is a charitable interpretation of logic and also human nature, whereas the other is frankly the kind of thing that would get you called a conspiracy theorist if you switched out the MacGuffin from capitalism to any other word whatsoever. Moving on. Batman.
Peace. The wealthy criminals control much of Gotham,
but Bruce Wayne has sway in Gotham as well, and Alfred reminds him of his responsibilities. The bad billionaires are bad, but the good billionaires are good.
Trust in capitalism. Batman also operates outside the system, but in the end, he is part of the system, an ally of the system, with all that implies. Trust in our...
Okay, hold on, before you...
Please go.
Again, it does kind of follow your point of this has a very nihilistic view of society in general.
Yeah.
But to get to the thing I was going to say, and feel free to add or tell me shut the fuck up.
No, go ahead.
But tell me if I'm wrong or not.
Right, yeah, but go ahead.
Batman in general, and even in this movie, it's where it's going, where it was set up to be, is more or less, he's always been fighting corruption in the system, because even though it is flawed, it is the best system that can work for people. And they're not denying that the system is flawed. It clearly is. But Batman, Bruce Wayne, Jim Gordon, Bella Royale in this movie, they're all trying at least to do better.
And here's, a couple things. One, no one said that the new mayor was going to be perfect. They just said that the new mayor was going to be better than the old mayor. And that's the other fallacy you're committing. The false dichotomy fallacy, where either everything is a perfectly functional utopia or burn the entire thing to the ground, nothing salvageable can be found here. One, there's this thing called incrementalism, which I don't particularly like either because it is far too reliant on systems and norms and what have you. But there's also this idea that treating things as individual variables rather than an interlocking system is helpful in such a situation. Just like the statement is not, bad billionaires are bad, it's good billionaires are good. The implication is there are good individuals and bad individuals. And no matter what position you place good individuals or bad individuals in, the focus should always be on the individual and how they use a given system. You can criticize flaws in a system, Leon, But here's the very important thing. You have to offer criticisms based on logic and that don't result in misanthropy. Because no matter what system you devise, Leon, humans will be involved in it. And if your idea of how to create a utopia is categorically misanthropic or counter to human nature, no good can come of it because you're trying to force human beings in a system human beings can't function in. Moving on. Batnana.
Okay. I'm almost done with this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Yeah, Batnana.
Our institutions. Corruption and radical politics are both outside of the system in equal measure, and in the center, an apolitical unity that ignores the actual causes of crime, and indeed the causes of injustice.
Presupposition.
Is this a good take? Is this a bad take? I don't know. As always,
your take is horrible and you should probably feel bad about it, but you're presupposing that those actual causes you're citing are a thing. If you're actually trying to build something from scratch, you can't come in with your own presuppositions. Because if you're actually trying to build something from scratch, you have to conclude that you are a factor in those presuppositions, i.e., you are the result of that system you're trying to rewrite. And no amount of getting quote-unquote outside the system is going to change that. So either you can learn about human nature and try to operate within the constrictions of human nature, or you can try to brainwash everyone and turn everyone into blank slates. Neither of which is particularly beneficial, frankly. But one would at least take into account variables rather than trying to smash everything and render it from the ground up. Anyway, Batnana.
Okay.
That is entirely for Twitter to decide. To clarify, I'm not judging who is right within the confines of the narrative that they made. The Riddler kills a bunch of people and floods a city. I'm analyzing why the narrative looks like this in the first place and what it says about our culture.
Fuck off.
It doesn't need to say anything because the thing in itself is a thing, Leon. And also, who is to say that there is even a reason why the narrative is structured this way beyond the fact that there is simple, in-universe logic to be dealt with? This is the thing. You claim to want to be informed as to why the narrative looks like this, while simultaneously ignoring any of the in-universe logic, any of the actual structure of the movie, any of the actual creative decisions, etc. You only care about themes and sociopolitical weaponization, which isn't how art works, Leon. God damn it. Also, the fact that your judge, jury, and executioner is Twitter is jarring and hilarious all at the same time. It couldn't be that anyone outside of Twitter could ever have a valid opinion, or that anyone who is an individual could come on this and tell you whether it's a good take or not. And I would imagine that this appeal to Twitter you just made is looking very hilarious now when you consider that when you were making this, Twitter was in the hands of people like you, and now it is in the hands of people like Elon Musk. Batnana.
The Riddler is not right, but the Riddler is also not real. The portrayal of his fight for the downtrodden perspective as radical, dangerous, terroristic, and motivated only by vengeance and not justice is a choice by the filmmakers. The conclusion of the film that basically serves as a love letter to the good people
I was like, can he not sound? I'm sorry. Like this isn't really anachronistic of the video itself, but God, the guy sounds so both dead inside and fucking pretentious.
Yes, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah,
yeah, Leon. The thing of it is, your summary here is categorically wrong. The movie isn't opposed to radicalism, for Batman is in and of himself a radical. The motive in actuality, the movie doesn't take any position on his radicalism at all. The important part, if you even want to reduce it down to such a thing as there is an important part, is his motivation. His motivation is what defines his radicalism. His radicalism doesn't have anything to do with his motivation. i.e., his radicalism is bad because of, and only because of, the corruptive influences of his motivation. Whereas the radicalism of someone like Batman by the end of the movie is still not portrayed as perfect, but is a damn sight better than motivation that revolves around vengeance, which in this context means short-sighted, narcissistically injured vindictiveness, fueling violence without restraint, basically. Oh, God damn it. Anyway, Batnana.
Okay. Yep. Batnana.
People who reinforce our ultimately good institutions that exist to serve justice is also a choice. These choices do not necessarily have these intentions, but finding authorial intention is not the goal here. These choices are worth thinking about because they reveal cultural biases and presuppositions.
Okay. So he basically says nothing. Right? Like, am I? He says nothing effectively throughout all of this.
Nothing that in any way holds up to any sort of scrutiny, anyway. I would agree with you that authorial intent doesn't matter, Leon, but how the fuck did you come to the conclusion that all this cultural gobbledygook is somehow more important than in-universe logic, or characterization, or stylization, or world building, or shot composition, or color composition, or any of the more important things people find in movies or art in general? Anyway, Batnana.
Positions that existed prior to the creation of the film and outside of the industry of film. So why don't I talk about movies on my channel that much anymore? Part of the reason is that I find discussing politics more urgent right now. We still need art and we still need art criticism, but other things have captured my interest and my sense of urgency.
Okay, so basically, you've lost the ability to enjoy art because something real world politics is more important. Yep, that does actually explain everything. I just hope that when all this is said and done, you can go back to simply enjoying art for its own sake and not all the sociopolitical gobbledygook. Because I get the distinct impression that to some degree you always had the potential to be this way, and that the world operating in a way that you don't like genuinely just screwed up your brain entirely. Like, I worry for you and for Movie Bob and for all the other people who do this, because not only has has your obsession with politics, real world or otherwise, ruined your ability in recent years to enjoy art or movies or stories or what have you? But it also appears that there's no turning back for you. There's no turning it off. Because if there was a way for you to turn it off, you would have already turned it off, at least for the duration of a movie, and examined the movie as a thing in itself to be enjoyed or examined, rather than a piece of socio-political weaponry. But it very much appears like you sat down with the monkey of politics on your back, and you left the theater with the monkey of politics still just as much on your back, if not further dug into your back. And I hope to any gods or any, forces that control the universe that might be listening, that you will someday find that you got a little bit in over your head with all this political shit, and just go back to viewing art as an end in itself instead of a means to an end. But I don't think that's likely to happen, because you can't even see your perspective as a perspective anymore. You can't tell the difference between the way you choose to interpret things and the quote-unquote truth. And that it makes me feel bad for you, if nothing else, because I used to really enjoy you and Kyle Calgren from Browse Health High, and even Movie Bob. And it seemed like as long as the world was operating in a way you thought was plausible or a way you thought was beneficial, that could have continued for the foreseeable future, and no one would have been the wiser. But the fact that the world ceased to operate in a way that you like seems to have genuinely traumatized you, as though every waking moment when a political thing happens to you that you don't like is like 9/11 happening to your brain over and over and over again. And I feel sorry for the person that I used to enjoy, and for the perspective that I used to consider valuable, that appears to have been nuked from orbit by essentially just narcissistic, nihilistic whining that the world isn't going your way at any given moment. I'm so sorry, Leon. I didn't realize how long the termites had dined on your brain, but I hope someday they will stop dining and you can go back to being who you were in like 2013 through 2015 or something along those lines. But I only have hope left, Batnana.
Okay, Batman.
Pretty sure there are other people with better, hotter pop culture takes anyway. I'm passionate about politics, but only in the sense that that is life. I'm passionate about film because I enjoy watching movies. I enjoy thinking about movies. I enjoy analyzing movies. It's fun. But making the thing that I think is fun also my job
Okay, there's your problem. Politics is not life. Life exists independently of, and it sometimes even in contravention to, politics. Philosophy also exists independently of politics, as does intellectualism, as does analysis, as does thinking about things, as does enjoying things. The fact that you equate, and in fact you just did equate, politics to life as though they are interchangeable and synonymous things is exactly why you are now in this situation. And I'm glad that some spark of enjoyment of film still remains in you. I wonder how buried under 57 layers of academic sociopolitical gobbledygook that enjoyment is. Because I don't want to speculate and I don't want to ad hom because that would be stupid, but it seems like there are a lot of layers between whatever inner child of yours still likes watching movies and the years of socio-political indoctrination and college quote-unquote education is standing between that inner child and the warped shell of an adult that metaphorically sits before me. Batman.
Compromises the fun if the space in which I do my job is surrounded by toxicity. My political videos also get reactions from people of opposing politics, but those meltdown reactions at least feel relative to the incendiary nature of the subject matter. Pop culture meltdowns from the chud space are sad in a way that feels different, and I can't ignore it either.
You go fuck yourself.
Leon, if you bring something incendiary into a space, you don't get to be pissy when people react to that incendiariness. And you, of all people, certainly don't get to talk about someone weaponizing politics or weaponizing popular culture or artistic spaces for socio-political reasons, because that is what you yourself are doing. If you don't like politics being injected in pop culture, try knocking it the fuck off first. Because if you bring it up, people will react to you having brought it up and bring things of their own into the conversation. If you never bring it up, it never tends to get brought up. Except for perhaps if you try to be abjectly neutral on all things, which would be silly. Because that would come off as disingenuous. But you don't get to say, everyone who brings any politics that I don't like into something is disingenuous and childish and silly, while also simultaneously bringing up your own thing every 5 fucking minutes. Either everyone gets a sword or no one gets a sword. Either everyone gets a gun or no one gets a gun, Leon, metaphorically speaking, of course. I.e., everyone gets to have a political discussion or no one gets to have a political discussion. And here's the thing, Leon. This is the roadblock in your mentality. Art isn't just an ephemeral, useless thing to a lot of people. To a lot of people, to be sincere about art, to be sincere about fandom, to be sincere about gaming, to be sincere about anything, they have to actually give a shit about it. I'm sorry that it seems like you never did, or that you only used art as some kind of... I don't even want to say escapism, because that also is somewhat loaded at this point, but the fact that you seem to view art as so immaterial that it's a safe space for you to get away from it all doesn't mean that other people don't consider art important. And here's the thing, Leon. As I just got through explaining to you no less than 5 times, I am sure some people consider things valuable for their own sake. You only seem to value politics. And the only reason you previously didn't bring politics and such into movies is because you view art as so unimportant that you don't want to sully politics by bringing it into art. Well, a lot of people are the other way around. People view art as so important that they don't want to bring politics into it because they actually view politics as largely unimportant. And more or less, Leon, they have the lion's share of the credibility here. Politics is less important than art because art has the capacity to make life worth living for its own sake. You don't have to care about Spider-Man because he's a commentary on vigilantism, or he's a commentary on inner city living, or he's a commentary on this, a commentary on that, a commentary on the other. You can care about Spider-Man because you care about Peter Parker as a character, or the world building, or the in-universe logic, or the way that Spider-Man interacts with other characters, or what the fuck ever, you know. And this, I'm using Spider-Man as the example, but you can do this with every other thing in art, every other thing in fandom, every other thing in IPs. Some things are valuable for their own sake, and that's perfectly okay. I feel weird for having to explain this to a grown-ass man. Moving on. And I apologize if I sounded extremely condescending there, but I was being extremely condescending there because this is something you have to explain to a 5-year-old. This is not something that you have to explain to a sane human being under normal circumstances.
My issue was you feel like you were kind of both repeating and droning on a bit.
Yeah, I may have repeated myself a couple times, but I kind of did it just to. I was trying to break this down in the most simplistic terms possible, in the hopes that some part of it would get through his head. You know, the old adage of you can't truly understand something unless you can explain it to a 5-year-old. And that's how I'm feeling right now. Like I'm having to break down an incredibly simplistic thing in incredibly complex terms because that's the only terms he understands anymore. Yeah. Yep. Batman.
Because I can't help but interact with the space I occupy. It ends up hurting my enjoyment of film, and I would love to get that feeling back. I'm going to try to get back into watching movies, but on my own instead of in public or on my YouTube channel. I don't regret making this video. It was very cathartic. I originally started writing this in a more melancholy mood.
We can tell, Leon.
Yeah.
And you may have left it by a couple inches, but I think by and large you're still there. And again, the fact that politics takes up so much of your life and so much of what you consider important, that other people having a different political persuasion than you in an artistic space can actually secondarily ruin that artistic space for you, is fundamentally the problem. Put it down, walk away. And by that I don't mean walk away from movies, I mean walk away from the political shit. Like, that's the thing. Most people, if given the option of, okay, you can either care about politics or you can care about art, choose art over politics. Your biggest problem, Leon, seems to be that you chose the other way around. You chose art. You chose politics over art. And that's the part that people get pissed off with you for. Because that is the categorically wrong choice, sir. And not only is it the wrong choice just in general, not only is it the wrong choice in the abstract, it appears to be a choice that is actively harming your quality of life. And that makes me sad, as someone who used to really enjoy your content, when it was just a little bit more philosophical, little bit more academic version of film analysis than something like, Nostalgia Critic or Linkara or Blockbuster Buster, but it was still in that same vein. Whereas now it's 1 part movie to 9 parts politics, and no philosophy of any kind that isn't political, it seems, which is just sad.
All right.
Yep, Batnana.
And it was about twice as long too, but in the end, I was like, yeah, I think I'll watch and analyze movies on my own and not in public, and I'll get that magic back again. For myself, just for myself. Maybe the occasional video about Star Trek purely as a palate cleanser, but that's it. At least once a week. Someone comment.
Again, you wouldn't have to retreat from the public space if you could just handle the public space. That seems to be a problem. Other people existing contrary to the way you exist seems to be so detrimental to you that you simply can't handle it. And I feel bad for you, Leon, because the adult way to do this is just let the politics go for a bit. Don't let people disagreeing with you get to you, or better yet, maybe sometimes listen to them as though they're equally valid human beings. Because being in your own head for too long, and I can vouch for this as someone with severe anxiety disorder, being in your own head for too long can really fuck you up, because it sends your mind in spiraling circles that will ultimately destroy themselves and you. Unless you can either grow a spine or admit when you are wrong. Or at least consider the fact that you might sometimes be wrong. And engage with people who have different perspectives without calling them immoral and stupid. Anyway, Batnana.
Yeah, I have that. Batnana.
Comments under one of my videos with, remember when this channel was about movies? Yeah, I do. But I'm not a channel. I'm a person. And I don't want to do that anymore. At least not right now.
Okay, again, your channel used to be something that you and your audience could both enjoy, and it was a somewhat reflective aspect of you. And again, it's very telling to me that given the choice between allowing your channel to continue being something you enjoy, or fuck the movies, I'm gonna go full politics, you went full politics. You chose something that is abjectly worsening your quality of life and making you miserable, and making everyone who you interact with publicly miserable. You chose that over allowing your channel to be something that reflects things you enjoy, and allowing the work you do to be something you enjoy, and allowing your enjoyment to be devoid of your politics for 5 fucking minutes. Now I just feel bad for him. Like, I got very angry at all the stupid, and there was a lot of stupid, but now I just feel bad for him. Because he was faced with a choice, and fair enough for him for acknowledging that he was faced with a choice. But he abjectly made the wrong choice. Rather than making his channel something to be proud of, he chose politics over everything that once made his life worth living. God, that's sad.
The final thing?
Yep, that's my... I just feel bad for him now. If he ever does movie stuff again, we'll probably cover it at some point, but...
Not the one day, at least.
Who knows?
Okay, this is the official trailer for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Mutant Mayhem. We covered the teaser trailer not too long ago, to my memory, like a couple weeks ago, I think.
Yeah, it wasn't that long. It was maybe like 2 months ago, maybe like a month and a half. I don't know.
I think about a month, actually.
Was it that recent? I don't remember it. I could have sworn we were still talking about Velma when we saw the first one, but
I think it was, I don't know. But yeah, it's gonna be our final thing to talk about. Is it showing up? Yes, it is.
Yep.
Okay. So shall we pizza?
There's got shall we ooze?
No. Banana pizza.
Even speaking as someone who likes pineapple on pizza, that's mildly disturbing.
Yeah, no, I hated it as soon as I said it, but I'm running with it. Fuck it. Let's do it. Banana pizza.
Okay. if it means that much to you, I will cringe every time I say it, but banana pizza.
Yeah, no.
Unless we're talking about dessert pizza, that actually like a banana dessert pizza with like cream cheese instead of actual cheese and like cinnamon instead of tomato sauce wouldn't be too terrible.
What about the crust though? That's the question. Would it be
Graham cracker crust.
Okay.
Yeah. I have seen dessert pizzas. In fact, my little brother used to like to go to Chuck E. Cheese, and every time we would go, there's this apple cinnamon pizza that I always used to love to get. It was freaking amazing. Dessert pizza. God damn it. Banana pizza.
Yeah. Okay.
Boys, where have you been? We're just running errands.
That's it?
I'm really sorry, Splinter. Some of the guys wanted to get pizza and I tried to talk them out of it. You ratted us out. Wait.
Don't use that word that way.
I mean, it's 2023. Sorry, Dad.
Okay, that kind of made me laugh. 1 point, movie.
I mean, it does kind of help that Jackie Chan is voicing Splinter.
Which, I'm sorry that he has to be in this movie. It seems like a waste of Jackie Chan playing Splinter, but okay.
See, here's my kind of issue. I think I'm going to be reiterating points I made when we left the teaser.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind the art style. The art style's fine. But the characterization, I think, was the biggest issue for us.
Yeah. The characters aren't the characters.
Mainly because it doesn't help that they're preteens.
Which falls under the category of you had, like, one job. There are 4 words in the title, and you failed at one of them.
It's just weird to me that it's just like the voices are kind of weirding me out, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're so young, like high-pitched.
Yeah, because they're trying to appeal to the youth demographic. But frankly, if the youth demographic I can't speak. If the youth demographic cares about the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle IP at all, it's probably because someone in their family, or just by virtue of their own, looking, they stumbled on one of the old Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle things, or the Nickelodeon show. And even then, even the kids who grew up with the Nickelodeon show probably would be annoyed at the reboot, because because the Nickelodeon show is recent enough that even they would spot the annoyance of the reboot.
I mean, so I'm in like this weird position because I remember watching like the CW for Kids Teenage Ninja Turtle cartoons.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember
the one from like 2003, 2005. That one.
Yeah, fast forward. Teenage Ninja Turtles. 2003. Fast forward, which I actually really enjoyed. And Back to the Sewers.
Mm-hmm. The sequel shows.
Yeah, I thought that was good. And I obviously I was kind of at that age where I was starting to watch the 2012 reboot, which I thought was good too. I'm not really trying to pick favorites here. I'm just pointing that out. But and I've watched like a lot of other stuff. I even watched like the movies, like the 90s movies. Hell, even when it was on Netflix, I watched the spin-off show they had.
There was a spin-off show from the 90s movies?
Yeah, it had a female Ninja Turtle called Venus.
Oh, right, her. I remember her mostly from like stage shows that used to be a thing, but anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I remember that. I watched that, and so I have a good relative understanding of Teenage Ninja Turtles. Granted,
yeah, and
I'm always more invested in Casey Jones.
Yeah, I was just about to say you have some level of love for these guys because Casey Jones exists.
Oh yeah, no, I've made no secret that my love for Casey Jones is pretty big. But
to the point that for Christmas a couple of years ago, I gave him a hockey mask, specifically because of his Casey Jones fanboyism.
right. And thanks for that, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
But given my knowledge, and I'm not trying to be like a gatekeeping fanboy or anything. I'm more speaking this as a guy who has watched a lot of TNT. This feels weird. Like this is a weird thing.
It's not simply a matter of, oh, this is the different interpretation than the one I grew up with kind of thing, because
no. It feels like it's lacking something.
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat because I also grew up with like 3 separate different versions of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I had a vague knowledge of the original like 80s cartoon. And I grew up with the 2003 to 2005 action cartoon and its various spin-offs, and also the TMNT movie. And I also remember renting on, I believe it was pay-per-view, because we had Time Warner Cable at the time, and there were a bunch of pay-per-view channels and like movie channels and stuff. I remember renting all 3 of the 90s movies. So yeah, and also I think we've both seen the 80s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, 2000s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles crossover that basically implied the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles verse.
Yeah, I remember that, and that was a good crossover, by the way.
Mm-hmm. And I have since also looked into some of the comics, i.e., the original comics before even the movie came out. And
I've looked into the IDW stuff. It's actually pretty good. I haven't been able to read much of it lately just because I've kind of fallen back from it.
Yeah.
I'd have to get I honestly have to get an omnibus, I think.
Yeah, but I think we both have grown up with enough different interpretations of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles that it's not a matter of when this is simply a different interpretation.
It's just like it's missing. I don't want to say it's missing heart because I don't think that's it, but it's missing a certain factor that makes it.
It's simply missing part of the core of the franchise, or what makes different interpretations of the franchise work. It's kind of like Velma and in relation to Scooby-Doo. It's not that we don't both have a background with like 5 different kinds of Scooby-Doo IP. It's that there's something universal to all of the different interpretations that this interpretation is almost deliberately lacking. Actually, that's the thing. It's not just that it's kind of missing the core. It's that you can almost tell that someone somewhere deliberately made the choice to avoid the core, to spite the IP, to spite the fan base.
I mean, Seth Rogen is working on this.
Well, yeah, but that's the main differentiation between a adaptation that is simply incompetent and an adaptation that is actively spiteful.
I think again, sorry,
no, go ahead.
We're just going to be here for a while, so I do want to kind of fast track it a bit. Mm-hmm. Again, the thing we said in the trailer is the characterization is off because it all feels like they're all the same characters. There doesn't really seem to be differences.
Yeah, they don't seem to care about the differentiation between the personalities, which has always been the biggest thing.
Yeah. And I want to be fully honest, it has too much of a lighthearted tone.
Yeah, even the cheesy, over the top 80s, Saturday morning cartoon had a lot more weight behind it than
There's
this.
always, the best way I can put this, and then we'll move on. The best way I can put this is with TMNT, even though like it is somewhat like even when with like the original comics and stuff from like the 80s, there was always this maturity about it, and even with like the more kid-friendly version.
Yeah, the original comic, especially the original comic, was actually quite like dark and edgy.
To be fair, it was like it was supposed to be a parody of like.
Yeah, but it still was very much like Frank Miller-esque almost.
Yeah, but there's always like this underlying maturity of things, and again, those kind of work with like the teenage part of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and the lore of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is, you know, they're growing up and advancing and maturing.
Because in some ways they're not superheroes exactly, but they're superheroes without being superheroes, if that makes any sense.
Vigilantes.
Yeah. Certainly vigilantes, and definitely in the same kind of vein as your average superhero.
I mean, like hell, even like you look at the expansiveness of their universe in any continuity.
Especially with the turtle multiverse now.
They got time travel, and that's been introduced. They got ninja clans, they got gods, they got dragons, aliens,
magic.
Yeah, like
robots.
In 2003 cartoon,
sci-fi, etc. Yeah.
In the 2003 cartoon, they and like it's been shows like that kind of universe in itself had superheroes in it, and I'm gonna bring this up until they finally do something about it, and like bring those like Justice Force into other mediums.
I forgot the Justice Force existed. Actually, that's a good point.
Yeah, but it's fucking cool.
Yeah, no, the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are kind of in the same boat as He-Man and Thundercats for me, in that like the original '80s one was over the top and cheesy, and then the 2000s incarnation came out and was like, what if we took this dead serious and made it awesome? And in so doing, they kind of perfected it, in my opinion. In the same way as, you know, I love all versions of Scooby-Doo, but the 4 movies that began with Zombie Island and ended with Cyber Chase were kind of perfect because they kept as much of the core as they could keep, and then turned the level to which we take this seriously up to an 11.
Yeah. So it feels like they're, but with like this, you know what? No, I'll save it until we get a little further in, just because we're only.
They turned it back down almost. They almost like they returned it to the '80s cheesiness without any of the cheesy over the top action or superhero plot lines that made the '80s one at least worth taking seriously.
That was
kind of like how the 2002 He-Man perfected what the '80s He-Man did, and then along comes the Netflix She-Ra and almost inverts the flow of the IP.
And again, I do want to point out my first ever real, true, honest to God exposure to Thundercats was 2011 one.
Again, same thing of like the '80s one. The '80s one was a starting place, and then we went, what if we took this dead seriously?
Yeah, there are actually a lot of '80s cartoons that I've looked into that honestly, if you did play them dead seriously, would be fucking awesome.
Yeah, and we know because a lot of IPs did that in the like 90s and 2000s, and they were epic. They're still epic. Certainly more epic than most of the modern interpretations, anyway.
I want to see a reboot of Extreme Dinosaurs from the 90s, or Mummies Alive, actually.
Oh, I remember those. They're in the same kind of boat as SWAT Cats. SWAT Cats the one I would like to see an honest to goodness reboot of after we fix what's going on in modern day art schools, because I don't want to see that. I don't want to see them turn SWAT Cats into Hello Kitty, which is what they basically would do.
Anyway, we should get back because we only been in the first 20 seconds. So.
Yep.
Banana pizza.
Banana pizza. I forgot what we were going with this time. Yeah, but banana pizza.
Hey guys, if we weren't monsters that were shunned by society and we could do what we wanted, what would you guys do?
Go to high school, maybe get a girlfriend. Can you imagine that?
Not likely.
Okay, what was that dialogue?
Yeah, that felt very like first draft. It didn't like it was mainly for like new I wouldn't even say exposition.
They're trying to be meta. They're trying to what if we had the characters say in universe what the average, bachelor's degree holding art student thinks?
So I'm gonna be fully honest, and you're gonna hate me for this. I'm sorry, but I honestly think the sequel to Michael Bay's Ninja Turtles actually did this kind of discussion better.
It did. Like, much as I despise the Bay because he is a contemptuous little shit, his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies weren't terrible. Mostly, I think because he was just the producer and not the director, but yeah.
Yeah, that's really fair. I think the main issue is, well, one, they over-designed the characters. And
I could have lived with that. The thing that bothered me was they were kind of like they were unnatural looking, but not in a good way, if that makes any sense. They very much broke the uncanny valley.
I think it could have worked. I don't know. I agree. It's yeah. But yeah, I'm just not getting I'm not really getting the tone at all.
No, the tone is just, hey guys, let's parody this IP, but in the universe of this IP, which is a thing that happens way too fucking much in modern day reboots of stuff, where instead of doing a parody of an IP, they'll put parody writers in charge of the IP itself and have the parody happen in universe, and it always comes off as dismissive, contemptuous, belittling, and quote unquote subversive in the worst way.
Yeah. Again, I think the art style's pretty good. It has a interesting it's very. I've seen a couple of things, a couple of movies, animated movies lately that honestly take a lot of inspiration from Spider-Verse.
Mm-hmm.
Which works. I mean, again, this is effectively a comic book property, so
it caught on for a reason.
Yeah.
So it's not like it's not like they are copying a bad precedent. It makes sense for the IP.
Yeah. It's the story that's kind of taking me out.
Mm-hmm. And like I say, the dialogue that was written by someone who is trying their damnedest to be, oh, aren't I so clever? And also, let me parody the IP in the universe of the IP.
Yeah, the thing is I get what they were trying to go with, and it's been a common theme and idea that's been explored throughout various mediums and stories of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I like how different they are.
But that's the thing. They're not trying to play the serious, they're different, so they're misunderstood card, because that would be something you'd do without the dialogue. It seems like they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to go the serious route, so they figured, hey, we'll just stick this line in here to make fun of anyone who would take this seriously. And I'm sorry, but no, there have been versions of this that have done it correctly, and actually instead of being so freaking meta and saying that descriptor, they just went ahead and showed it, and it worked. Because it was something that could be taken seriously for 5 minutes.
Right. Anyway.
Banana pizza.
Yeah, banana pizza. I don't know why I was going to say pizza banana, but that didn't sound right.
Although, now I'm imagining some kind of gene sliced thing where you peel a banana and it turns out that like it looks like a pizza on the inside and tastes like pizza.
Right. What I pictured was a banana not a banana, a pizza, like a whole pizza, right?
Mm-hmm.
It folded into the shape of banana.
I was picturing something like from the Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs movie, like somebody ordered a pizza banana and it came out as like something that looks like a banana on the outside, and then you peel it and it has pizza on the inside instead of an actual banana.
Okay. Anyway, shall we?
Yeah.
Banana pizza.
Banana pizza.
I want to know everything about you.
Our dad is definitely not a giant rat. That makes me feel like he's a rat.
Police are baffled by the recent crime led by a Superfly.
Nobody's ever seen his face.
Again, this sounds like a very condescending, very dismissive parody of the IP rather than something that should be coming from the actual IP.
I don't know. It's weird. Like I'm not feeling it. I'm not feeling it. You know.
Mm-hmm. It's TMNT if it were written by Valley Girls, basically.
Oh my god.
Or hipsters.
Don't put that out into the world, you jackass.
It's already out there. That's what April just sounded like, and that's what Donnie sounded like when he was conversing with her like that.
I think that was Mikey.
Was that supposed to be?
Yeah,
God.
I honestly can't tell him that.
It's not like their character dynamics are the whole freaking point of the IP or anything. Oh wait, yes they are.
Oh, and I gotta ask, what version of April do you prefer? The older version, who's kind of like the big sister to them, or someone who's the same age as them?
I don't freaking know, because in the 2003 through 2005 one, she kind of was both. Like she kind of had the same vibe as Eliza for the Gargoyles. Like she could be more mature than them sometimes, but in a lot of ways they were on equal footing.
To be fair, that is how friends work.
Yeah. Yeah. See also our entire friendship. Yeah, I know.
For the record, I'm the mature one.
Sure.
Oh, you're more immature than me, let's be honest.
No, I am more educated on how the internet works. There is a difference. You don't get meme culture because you didn't get in on the ground floor of like the internet before it became a censored nightmare.
Fair enough. Yeah, like, I don't know. And just everything about it just seems so off, and not even I don't know.
Like I said, until I'm proven otherwise or have something else to complain about, it seems like most of the problems here could be chalked up to something that I've noticed with a lot of IPs recently, which is instead of making a parody of an IP, which would go over perfectly well, they put the people who would be the parody writers in charge of the IP, and the parody writers were contemptuous enough of the IP that they thought to themselves, hey guys, let's do all those parody ideas, but let's do them with the actual IP instead of out of universe.
You know what's weird? I actually seen a couple of parodies of TMNT that are actually kind of more homages than anything. Like, actually gain a lot of respect.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually I've read called Radically Rearranged Ronin Ragdolls.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I think I've mentioned it once on the stream before.
You probably did. I remember when it first came out because I think Englentine or Vankman or somebody on that side of things talked about it.
Yeah, it was fun. It was very much a parody of like the 80s comics.
Yeah, the usual like Rob Liefeldian. Let's play an incredibly absurd premise as straight as possible and make it over the top edgy.
I wouldn't say it was edgy. It was just like.
Well, no, because it was making fun of the edginess, but yeah, that's that kind of thing.
This, yeah, like I do agree. Like it does feel somewhat parody-ish, but not a good kind of parody, you know.
No, it's a parody that mocks its subject matter rather than like affectionately ribbing it. And that's the other thing. So much of parody these days is born out of spite and contempt rather than I really love this thing, let's make fun. Like, okay, good parody is something like DBZ Abridged. It is able to make jokes about the thing because it knows and loves the thing, and in some ways is able to actually able to add something new or interesting to the friend. Like, okay, another great example. Gene Wilder movie, Young Frankenstein, is actually a really funny parody, and it works in kind of the vein of Frankenstein, or something like, speaking of the Universal movie monsters, something like The Monsters, is able to both be a good parody of the thing and also it adds enough new that it's able to stand on its own 2 feet as its own IP.
No.
Yeah. Banana pizza.
Banana pizza. I'm hungry for banana pizza.
Surely, apart from possibly the dessert example I gave earlier, that's not a thing.
Well, I meant the dessert, obviously.
Right. All right. Okay. I was about to. If you started craving like someone putting bananas on like the standard savory pizza, I was going to think there was something wrong with you.
I'll be fully honest. I don't really like bananas much.
Well, you don't. If I remember correctly, you don't like fruit. Period. Very much.
Yeah, it's just every time I try to eat fruit, mainly bananas and apples, because those were the fruits I ate most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Either they're not ripe, or there's a rotten spot in them.
I can see why that would ruin fruit for you.
Or they're too sweet. You know, like.
See, I don't have a problem with that. I like my fruit as sweet as possible. But like I totally understand where you're coming from. I love fruit. especially in desserts or especially in like yogurt and stuff.
Banana pudding, yeah, I can eat that.
Pudding is just one of the most amazing things ever. Like,
anyway,
on balance, I would actually sometimes prefer like pudding or yogurt over ice cream in general. But
you ever had banana walnut muffins? Banana walnut muffins. You ever had those?
I have had banana nut muffins many times, although the nuts sometimes vary. I don't think I've ever had them with walnuts.
That's what I always got. We haven't gotten them in years, but those are my favorite type of muffins. To be honest, to be fair, I'm not a big fan of blueberries. So.
I was gonna say I absolutely adore blueberry. But now all I can think of is the one exchange in the food fight scene of the Fairly Odd Parents Abracatastrophe special, where they're naming all the different kinds of muffins: blueberry, cranberry, bananas, oat, wheat, poppy seed.
Anyway,
moving on. Banana pizza.
Ever seen his face?
Why?
Because he kills everyone he does.
Cool.
No, not cool.
A bit cool.
Can I kick it?
We think out super fun, and then everyone will think we're cool. They'll accept us.
Can I kick it?
Okay.
A deal tonight under the Brooklyn Bridge.
Can I kick?
Whoa.
Stop making jokes about the more serious version of this and actually just go ahead and do it already. Fuck's sake, this is bothering me.
I will say the thing I enjoy the most about this is that they're having mutants be the first antagonists these shows go up against. Because it's so different from like everything else. It's usually the Foot Clan and stuff. So. So
I don't like them explicitly trying to go to like high school and gain acceptance and like that just it smacks of bullshit again. Like
I think if anything it's more so the execution and the handling of it that is the problem.
Yeah, they could have done something like this on Spectacular Spider-Man, somebody who had been mutated and wanted to still go to school or something, but like just coming out and saying it and then basically betraying, like it's like in the recent animated Addams Family movie when they had Wednesday wear pink and start liking normal shit. Like in theory that should work as a contrast to the Addams, but in actuality it just feels like a bad parody concept of the Addams rather than something that would actually happen in the IP itself.
Right. Yeah. Also, I'm making Baxter Stockman a credible threat here. I assume.
I think so, but I can't tell from the trailer anyway.
Well, I mean, Baxter Stockman, whenever he's mutated, he turns into a giant fly or bug. So.
Yeah. I wonder if they'll pull the twist villain card and make him the Shredder the whole time or something.
Yeah, I hope. Okay, I love the Foot Clan. Don't get me wrong. I think they're fucking cool. But
there are other villains in the universe of TMNT to use.
Like there are so many. Hell, you could even just do a full movie about the Purple Dragons, which I realize are connected to the Foot Clan, but Jesus Christ, they're a fucking street gang.
Mm-hmm.
Also a connection you can do with Casey fucking Jones if you want to introduce him. Although I don't want him to be in this because fuck me, he'll be fucked over.
They will quote unquote massacre your boy.
That's what I write.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. Shall we bet banana pizza?
We shall banana pizza. Which now I want to make a dessert pizza with bananas just to see what happens. Anyway, moving on. Sorry.
Let me.
Other mutants!
You want to roll with us?
Humans are never gonna like us. So we're gonna let the mutant rule the earth.
They got to give.
Okay, sort of a twist.
We can't stop them.
We got.
They're really forcing the mutants being like marginalized bullshit, and I might be reaching a little bit too far, but especially with the like parody element, it comes off as very social justice-y of like the only thing someone with a social justice mindset can see when they look at the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles is marginalized people, quote unquote.
Okay, I'm not even going to say to be fair. My thing was going to be, if anything, there would be mutants in like, and I'm going off like things I've seen in other mediums, and I hate doing that, but just for comparison wise, at least.
Yeah. To contrast something being done well versus something being done poorly, at least. Yeah.
There is a character in the IDW comics called Old Hob, who was a cat that tried to kill the turtles in Master Splinter when they were still, animals.
Mm-hmm.
And Hob actually got mutated as well with the turtles and Splinter, but he ended up running a street gang and became like this big bad kind of guy. Granted, I believe, and and anyone who's read the IDW comics more can tell me. He also became kind of he was an antagonist for them for a time, obviously, because I believe Splinter took one of his eyes.
Which I suppose is, I mean, the oldest paddle in the book is cat and mouse, so fair enough.
Well, cat and rat, but
but you know what I'm saying. It's a tale as old as time. Cat v mouse thing.
I'm speedrunning this, but went through a character arc and sort of redeemed himself and became an ally of the turtles, but also still protects, like, I guess, the under.
So he pulled the Vegeta / Zuko sort of thing.
Kinda, yeah. Again, I haven't read that far because I only have like the first volume of the anime comics, so, but I've heard things on. But my point was being made of, like, more or less, there would be mutants that given the fact that they're mutants, would probably be big time killers in a lot of places. Considering.
Like, this is somewhat off topic, but I remember in The Librarians, they brought in Frankenstein's monster because, well, why not? And instead of maintaining his status as Frankenstein's monster, someone pointed out to him that the 21st century has better plastic surgery than the 19th, and he could probably do something about all the stitches. And then he goes on to become a professional athlete because of the monster's superhuman strength and stuff.
Oh, I really need to watch fucking Librarian. Oh my god.
Yeah.
But I do agree. Like, this somewhat. I don't want to say social justice, but it feels half baked, if nothing else.
It feels very, surface level political reading thing. Like,
yeah.
Oh, what makes the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles interesting? I know they're marginalized because they're mutants, right?
The thing is, I wish they could have taken more from Spider-Verse besides the animation style. Is the depth of storytelling that movie did. Because, I mean, it did parody stuff, but it was also very sincere as well. Anyway, shall we?
Yep. Banana pizza.
Gotta try. 6 in the morning, police at my door.
My son, Michelangelo, you have a heart,
Donatello, you have wisdom. Raphael, you have bravery. And Leonardo.
Okay, that part I actually kind of like.
Yeah, if you don't get this right though, I'm being annoyed because people often confuse Leo and Raph's defining qualities. Leo's defining quality is his leadership and his care for his father. I would argue that Raph's defining quality is his anger, but I'm fine with it being bravery for the sake of this. It's not that much of a huge gulf.
Well, and I have explained this before. That honestly, I attribute Raph's anger and rage more so to his the kind of, I guess you could somewhat say, flaw is that he cares too much about people and things that are close, like those close to him.
See, and I think I have argued previously that more describes Leo than Raph.
Hold on, the thing I'm just because I don't.
Sorry, go ahead. I didn't realize you weren't finished.
He is, if nothing else, you'd say he's emotional.
Yeah, I actually, I think if anything, Raphael's main quality is his independence. He wants to be independent. He doesn't want to be defined by his brothers or his father. He wants to be his own turtle.
You know what? I will concede that. I will concede to that.
Whereas Leo's main quality, insofar as it might even be a flaw, is his loyalty. Like he only sees the mission. He only sees his brothers. He only sees making Daddy proud of him, almost. Which is why Raph and Leo always come to blows, because Raph doesn't want to play by the rules that Daddy and brothers set out, and Leo is all, this is how we be good people. This is how we be good turtles, and so on.
Like I said, I like this part mainly because there's doesn't seem to be any jokes in it, and it feels genuinely serious.
Yeah, and it's the first indication that I've seen in 2 trailers that they actually know the difference between the characters.
Anyway, Kelly.
Banana pizza.
Banana pizza.
Enough talk. I dream about fighting every night.
You're great, Conrad.
That's not a problem.
Leo's defining quality being honor makes sense, so fair enough.
But yeah, I want to be excited for something these days.
Yeah, I would like at least one IP to be handled well. Is that too much to ask?
I mean, those Spider-Verse movies don't seem bad.
Yeah, the Spider-Verse movies are good, but I'm just saying, like, could we have one entire IP completely unspoiled by anything? Like, that would be so good.
I mean, Tron, but I mean, to be fair, no one.
Well, but still being actively used and not spoiled.
Yeah, that's why I was saying, like, but that's
yeah, they don't do anything with it. That's why I caught you, because it's like, I don't mean just leave the IP alone. I mean, still use the IP, but do it correctly. God damn it! I guess Mario was done really well, so fair enough. Mario is as yet completely unmolested by bullshit.
But yeah, that was everything. So with that, folks, I want to say goodbye, adios, aloha, avidazay, sayonara, peace, cheers, and
shalom and fuck off.